The desert had a way of stealing the voice from a man, as if sound itself were a luxury the Red Mountains could not spare. Eddard Stark had never loved the heat. He had been a winter child, born to a sky that showed its true heart only when it took the form of snow. And every footfall felt wrong here, each breath stubborn as an oath he had not yet fully sworn. The sky was a hard blue, so keen it hurt to look at, and the wind that found him at the turnings of the path carried sand enough to rasp the lips and the back of the throat. His cloak, once gray and proud, hung thin and isinglass pale with salt and dust, while beneath, the mail caught the sun and shed it in a feeble shimmer, too honest by half for this country of sun-choked secrets. He had grown quiet through long days of riding. The men with him had learned to match his silence, as though noise itself would court mischance in a land with so few shadows. Howland Reed alone spoke now and again, and only in whispers, as if to spare the air. Up ahead, the path was a broken white line stitched into the flank of a hill. Beyond it, the tower climbed into the dead blue sky, pale and solitary, like a finger raised in warning by some buried giant. It was not tall enough to be a proper castle and too well made to be a ruin. It wore its own name, the Tower of Joy, with the queer humor of places that had earned their truth in irony. Joy, Eddard thought, and pressed his dry tongue to his teeth. It sounds like a word a minstrel made to hide something that would not sing. They were 7. He tried not to think of the tale of the 7 against 3. It made everything into a song, and songs lied. But the counting of them came unbidden. Martin Castle rode with his jaw clenched and his eyes set forward, the lines at the corners carved by more than just sun. Theo Wool's beard had caught dust and grit like a sweep of dun feathers. Ethan Glover had a smudge of blood under one thumbnail where the nail had split a day past. Willem Dustin wore the marks of Dorne worse than any of them, his temper gone lean and brittle with the heat. Mark Griswold's gaze slid from horizon. Reed could see things others did not, Eddard knew. But whatever he saw now, he kept to himself. The bones of the land did not change for eyes. You'll say the word and we do it, Willem had told him 2 days ago by the water-fed tamarinds that were hardly trees. Either it's steel or it's nothing. But I've baked long enough. It's time. Messire. It's time when it's right, Eddard had answered, though he was not sure where right ended and necessity began. Now they made the last turning, and there the tower rose close enough to seem carved out of the very bone of the hill. The light made its edges shiver faintly. 3 riders waited in front of the narrow door, as they had a lifetime ago. In a dream, Eddard had tried not to dream. 3 white cloaks, unstained, draped the shoulders of hard men. Gerald Hightower sat like a piece of granite that had learned to bend knees and lift hands, his hair white as the cloak that named him, his eyes a pale wash of winter sky gray. Oswell Went had the dull, patient look of a man who had spent his strength so thoroughly he had nothing left for show. And Arthur Dane held sunlight captive along the edge of the sword laid across his lap. He turned the blade, and the light ran. A pale thing, down to the point where it dripped and vanished in the air. No words were called. No taunts were traded. The wind played at the hanging cloth on the saddles and tugged at the edges of the white cloaks, as if an old mother scolding them for their cleanliness. Eddard dismounted. Slow and stiff. He took the sword from Martin Castle when it was offered him, and felt its weight, as familiar by now as the weight of memory. It did not tremble in his hand, but his breath did. Just once. He stepped forward with Howland Reed on his right, and Willem Dustin on his left, because there needed to be witnesses for what might be said. I came for my sister, Eddard said, and his voice, when it found the air, sounded too loud for the day. Gerald Hightower looked at him, and there was nothing precisely unkind in that regard. It weighed him and found him wanting only by the measure of vows. Your sister is in the care of the King's Guard, he said. His tone was as plain as a flat stone. We guard what is sworn to us. My lord. Howland Reed said softly, her care is a bed of blood. There is no law that makes a womb a traitor. Arthur Dane turned his head, then to look at the small man from the neck, as if the breeze had carried a scent he recognized. Words from swamps, Oswell Went muttered, but with no contempt. It sounded tired, accustomed, a habit of saying what one says. "Rhaegar is dead," Eddard said. He did not let himself see again the moment the prince's armor opened like a fruit and the river took his blood. He kept the words hard. "Aerys is slain, and the city has fallen. Your oath was to a line, but lines end. There is only a woman and—" He stopped himself and swallowed. The word had risen like a bird that feared its own flight. Gerald Hightower did not blink. Lines bend. Lines are braided. A sword is straight because it must be straight. The rest is for talkers. Arthur Dayne shifted, one thumb smooth and pale on the scabbard throat, as though sunlight had not yet let go of it. "The boy in the city," he said, and the way he said boy had a shape of a ghost in it. "And his sister. Whatever has been done in that place, Sir Eddard, this is not there. Give us leave to speak our vows into the wind, and we will do our duty. It will be the best part of a broken thing." There was a sound from within the tower. The first voice that reached them was the raw cry of a new throat, wordless and perfect in its ignorance. And after it a woman's voice that was hoarse, as if torn by thorns. Names could be made of such a sound. Promises could be woven from it. Eddard felt his heart thump once. Hard enough that it seemed to lean him toward the door. The blood in him knew his sister's voice, even in that ruined shape. The air pulled thin in his chest and pushed out again. And when it came back, it brought the smell of fever and rushes. Stone warmed too long, and rosewater turned faint and dusty in the heat. He took 2 steps and found Arthur Dayne's horse's breath in his face. The animal's nostrils flexing, the old leather of the bridle creaking. The sword of the morning watched him with a gaze that was neither cold nor warm. "Sir Arthur," Eddard said, "you were Rhaegar's man first, the king's man second. Your oath was to those who needed steel and not crowns. There is nothing left of this but a woman with blue flowers in her hair, asking for her brother. There is a boy within who will be orphaned by a word if we are unwise." "Menabrow. Wisdom," Gerald said with iron tiredness, "is not ours to teach the wind. Vows are not oak to bend for the weather." "Damn?" Howland Reed wet his lips. And when he spoke again, it was the voice of a man who had spent time under trees older than speeches. "A vow is a path through a forest," he said. "You don't heed the path because the trees order you to. You yield to it because in dark woods it will save you. And in day you follow it because it's the way men have walked back to houses where their names still mean something. But sometimes the river floods and the path is lost. And the only wisdom is to get the people across and sort the path when the water falls." He drew a small thing out of his sleeve, a bit of wood carved with a Crannog man's patient hand. Nothing so grand the sun could pry pride loose from it. "By the old gods," he said, "and the eyes that see in bark and water, I ask truce until the woman can stand and speak, and the babe can take milk without a sword being drawn." It was an odd moment to feel the North so strongly, but Eddard did. It rose up in him as a kind of cold, a clarity, as if the sun had blinked and winter had looked him flat in the face. He drew himself taller and said, "I give my word for my men, for my house, and for myself. If you yield the door unread with steel, I will grant safe conduct for any of you who wish to depart to Starfall with the sword you bear restored to its hull. I will take my sister north. Whatever child lies within, I will not put it into King Robert's hands. That I swear before gods and men." "Damn." They looked at him all together then. Oswald Went's mouth worked once, a fish moving in a brook. Gerald Hightower was stone again. Arthur Dayne let out a breath so quiet, it could have been the tower's shadow shifting. "You make an oath to pull another from the mud," Gerald said, his horse's ears flicking. "There is honor there. But honor has a shape to it. Will you call this child what it is? Will you do what duty asks you in daylight, not only in shade?" "Ben." Eddard's throat felt tight enough, it would have split had he not been winter-hardened. He forced the words through. "I will do what keeps the innocent from being killed for the sins of men who are already dead." That was not a king's sentence. It was only a good man's. Perhaps that was a better thing, there at the base of the tower with the desert grinding its teeth. Arthur Dayne took his hand from the scabbard throat. The sun lit his hair as if it were a thing with breath. He glanced at Gerald Hightower, and it was plain to see there was a river between them and they both knew its current. "We could kill them," Arthur said without heat. 7, even tired, is a good number, and the sand makes graves quickly, but the babe would be crying still when our blood sank. I am not for a song today." Hightower looked slow on him. "And what we guard? We guard with breath for one more day instead of with breath cut away this hour," Arthur answered. "I will not call the sword of the morning a butcher's trade." "Take care you do not change the name to Shepherd," Oswell once said. But even that was wan. Gerald Hightower's gaze moved over Eddard Stark as a whetstone across steel. "No blade will enter the doorway," he said at last. "We will put down our lances where we stand and go in with empty hands. 2 only, and 2 of yours. The rest wait. Let the gods judge if the truce is ill-made. If a sword is drawn, then we are our duty, and you are your numbers." "Damn. The gods know my name," Eddard said. Howland Reed slipped the little carving back and took his place at Eddard's shoulder as if he had been measured for it. Willem Dustin spat once into the dust and squared himself as if the act made him heavier, more rooted. One by one the white cloaks unpinned their lances and let the bright points lower until they stood in the piss-stained dust like reeds in shallow water. Arthur Dayne laid Dawn carefully along the saddlebow, a gesture that was as much a prayer as a habit. He slid from the saddle with unpracticed grace. A man born to the ground never made peace with the way a horse swayed and breathed beneath him. Hightower and Dayne went ahead into the tower, and Eddard followed with Howland. The air changed at once, sunlight giving itself up to cool stone. It smelled of the end of a long summer. Rushes old and trodden, a trace of old smoke. Rosewater gone stale. Sweat, the thin copper of blood. The stair curled like a shy thing. They climbed, and the sound separated. A child's stop-start breath, and a woman's harder drafts. Eddard's legs moved as if he had borrowed them from another man, and they had not yet learned his shape. The door to the chamber stood half ajar. The white of the Kingsguard's cloaks brushed either side as Hightower and Dayne went through. Eddard's shoulder carried the door a little wider. The room took the light gently in 2 places, window slits that had been carved with more care than seemed sensible for such narrow mouths. The bed was a heavy old thing. A square of pale wood burnished by years of people who had lain there in heat and thirst, and made their private bargains with themselves. Lyanna lay propped on pillows, her hair a tangle, the dark of it seeped in sweat, a crown that had learned a rough humility. On her brow someone had laid petals, a handful of blue blossom clinging stubbornly to their shape. They had browned at the edges, a sapphire going to soot. In Lyanna's arms a child rested, tiny and complete as a secret written in a small hand. The sound the babe made was not quite a cry now, more a testing of the world's shape. He did not recall crossing the last of the space. He was only there, and the breath he had thought could not pass came and went because it must. Lyanna's eyes were the same winter gray as his own, but worn now by fever and a night that had lasted too long. "Leah," he said, and it was not a lord who spoke or a man with responsibilities braided into his hair like maces. It was a boy in the glassy yard at Winterfell, and the wind was north, and the world was just small enough to be survived. "Leah, little brother," she rasped. The old smile tried to climb her face, but found it built of new lands now. It only made it halfway and died. "You were just as I knew you would be. Too late." He took her hand and pressed it to his cheek. "No," he said. "In time. We will make it be in time." She made a sound that would have been laughter in a different house. "You cannot make the wind blow back into my chest, Ned. But I'll not be leaving yet." Her eyes traveled to the men behind him. "Sir Arthur," she said, and there was no scorn there. Only the recognition 2 proud things have when they are forced to share a stall. "Lord Commander." Gerald Hightower inclined his head, and because his face could not do kindness, he did duty instead. "My lady." "You've heard about Rhaegar," Lyanna said, and this time the smile did climb a little, though flat and lacking any warmth. "This tower has kept out less than you think." Arthur Dayne's mouth moved slightly. "I heard." "He was not a monster," she said, as if daring them to call it untrue. He was a man who read too many old books and believed them because his father had made the present into such a horror. He wanted a song to save us. She looked at Eddard then, and there was ache in the gaze that was almost amusement. You did not come to hear that. You came to take me out of a story and back into the world. I will go, but you must promise me. Her breath scraped on the way in. You must promise it with the gods watching you. Eddard did not let himself look at the child yet, because he was afraid the looking would take the last of his sense. He closed his sister's fingers in his hands, as gentle as he could without trembling, and bent his head. His kneeling put him lower than the bed, and for a moment, he felt like a squire again. His face turned toward the flagstones and the feet of men who carried the names of old weapons. Say it, he whispered to the stones. Keep him safe, she said. The shape of the room held that sentence as if the walls took it in and set it like a bead into their mortar. From Robert. Her eyes were suddenly fierce, fever bright and winter cold in the same turning. He loved what he made of me, not what I am. He will hate what I have made, or worse. He will try to make it into himself. I won't see it. Keep him safe. Swear it. Swear it by the weirwood. Swear it by the river you fell into at 8 years old and lied to father about. Swear it, Ned. Now. I swear it, he said, though it strangled. By the heart tree, and by all the waters of the north, and by the memory of our father and brother. I swear it by the breath in me, and by the breath I will not have. If it must be so, I swear it. Lyanna nodded and loosened. The child stirred. A hand the size of a leaf opened and closed. Eddard let himself look then, and fell harder than if someone had pulled a spear from under his ribs. The infant's hair was black. The face was small with that sallow translucence of new flesh. He knew nothing in it, and he knew everything. We named him, Lyanna said softly, and now there was something like shame in her eyes that had never known how to wear that garment well. Rhaegar would have called him many times over with names out of old books. I wanted something the North remembers. In my heart I called him Jaehaerys when the fever took me, but that was only in fever. A name like a winter cloak is better. Her lips trembled and steadied. You will call him something that is not a king's, a name that will not drown him. Will you? Menshara. Eddard almost said the name that rose in him like a spring. Aemon, for wisdom and the weariness of it. Or Aegon, if he would be bold enough to taunt fate. Or Brandon for a brother with a laugh like a thrown stone striking water. But he felt another name growing taller, the name of a man who had saved him once while he was still boy enough to need saving. Jon, he said. I will call him Jon. His throat grew tight with the shape of it. No king's name. A man's. Lyanna's mouth remembered at last how to smile. There was nothing of sweetness in it, but there was relief. Good, she said. Good, good. While her hand, as if separate from her, soothed the child's cheek with the smallest of gestures. Promise me again, she whispered. He did, and her eyes closed. The breath in her chest did not leave, not then. It went on like a thing that had to work now that something had been made of it. Behind them, Gerald Hightower spoke in the torn hush. The truce stands, he said. Sir Arthur and I will accompany you as far as the river Vaith. There we will part. Oswell will take word to Starfall to make ready. He did not ask permission of Arthur Dayne for that. The chain of command was clear, even if not all men bound to it would live much longer to care. We will need milk. Howland Reed said practically, as if he were back in the neck arranging frogs. And cool water boiled and cooled again. And something to draw the fever. His frog-green eyes flicked to Arthur Dayne. You have women here, I trust. Not all vows are kept only with steel. Ben? There are two, Dayne said. Sorella of the Yellow City and a girl from God's Grace. They have been. Enough? He looked down at Lyanna and the baby, and then up at Eddard, as if measuring a thing. We lacked a brother. Now we have one, he said dryly. A Stark to teach us how to ride night to reach water. I do not want to learn your desert, Eddard answered. I want to be gone from it, and to take my sister into a cold that will hide her. It took a day to make the tower ready to be left without shame. And it may be that the day saved Lyanna's life. Sorella brewed a tea that tasted of salt and the inside of old jars. The girl from God's grace boiled and pulled fresh water and laid cooled cloth along Lyanna's brow and throat and breasts. The babe took milk from a skin like a serious little king practicing a duty. Eddard, when he was not tending to arrangements, sat beside the bed and spoke quietly of Winterfell, to put a shape to the place he had sworn to carry her. He told her about the atrium where the first snows drifted and made small neat worlds on the stone, until the warmth of men's going and coming broke them. About old Nan's stories at the hearth that never slowed even when her voice gave out, because the story was stronger than her breath. About the smell of the godswood in spring when the iron tang of sap from the heart tree made the air feel like something you could drink. At dusk, while Howland Reed counted skins of water and Willem Dustin measured salt meat, with a captain's frown, Arthur Dayne took the blade from the saddle and brought it up to the tower's roof. Eddard found him there by following the nicotine smell of the rope used to lash the blade in travel. Dayne held Dawn as if it weighed far more than it did. "My sister will ask who holds it," Arthur said without turning. His voice had the desert in it now. "Worn to virtue by wind." Ashara has a way of starting a sentence with a question and finishing it with a judgment. Eddard stared at the pale sword. He had expected it to be brighter somehow. It was a winter blade after all. "I have heard things," he said, and then felt the stupidity of that at once in the face of a man whose sister's name was not a rumor to him, but a child's face and a woman's. "I do not care what you have heard," Arthur answered, not unkindly. "I care who carries the sword out of Dorne and into Dorne again, and whether the carrying is done with the honor it requires. It is not mine, you know. Men make names for men, and names make cages. I was a boy with a blade before I was an emblem, and later I was a man holding an emblem and trying to do a boy's honest thing with it. The blade belongs to a hall with sun on its floor and walls thick with old heat. It belongs to men who wake and look at it and feel their backbones set. It belongs to my house and everything that means, and not one breath more of what the realm calls me. You see? Then?" Eddard nodded. The godswood at Winterfell had its own sword, the heart tree's red leaves that cut the sky and made things bleed truth whether they would or no. "I see." Arthur sighed. "Good," he said. "Then you will not be tempted into poetry when you lay it on the high table. I will lay it where you ask, and I will not carry songs with it." Arthur Dayne's mouth made the smallest shape toward a smile. "Promise me that, Stark, and I would almost forget I hold you to another promise." They left as the sun rose without grace, reddening itself out of a desert that did not care. Oswell rode ahead with two of the girls from the tower, riding lithe and small and wrapped in veils that made their eyes into small brave moons. Gerald Hightower took the rear as if he could make his back into a wall the very land might be ashamed to violate. The rest of them traveled inside the White Cloak's long shadow. Eddard rode near the little cart that had been found, the kind used to bring dates and water to the tower under a soft lash, now fitted with a small awning to make a patch of shade for Lyanna and the child. Lyanna had argued against the cart until she ran out of breath. Then she had fallen asleep in it with a look almost peaceful, and the baby at her breast, a triangle of ordinary life in a land that traded in the uncanny. Arthur Dayne rode beside the cart. He said very little. Howland Reed spoke to the mule as if it were a man of the neck, who had to be coaxed into admitting a truth. Willem Dustin scowled at the land whenever it opened its mouth in a gully, and didn't stop scowling until it had closed again. Martin Castle studied the way Dawn lay in its wrappings across Dayne's saddle, and kept his hands from twitching toward it with an effort as visible as sweat. They were a strange company for any tale. 2 bits of North iron, 3 men of White Oath, a frog-eater, a few servants, and a pair of Stark siblings with a child that carried the most dangerous blood in the world and the most ordinary hunger. Between 1 mile and the next, the mountains relented enough to permit the idea of other life. Groves appeared, as if they had stood all along and simply decided to become visible. A thin stream forced itself into the open, and then, ashamed, hid again. At midday they came to a caravanserai of sorts, a square of failed walls, and a well that was not exactly dry. Sorella had rider's skill. She took skins down without spilling, counted them with fingers that never lost track of the count, even when she was sweating and arguing with the other girl in a whisper. Lyanna insisted on walking a little, and Eddard acquiesced only because he thought giving her a thing would let him deny her other, worse things later. She was light as a bird, cruelly so for someone who had raced direwolf fast across Winterfell's meadows. "You mean to smuggle me?" she told him, when they had gone 20 paces together, her hand tight in his because the desert tilted under her. "Smuggle your sister home in a cart like a bit of contraband. Better men have been smuggled worse." "Benderau. We will go to Starfall first," he answered neutrally, as if the words had been brought to him already cooled and carved. "It is a thing that must be done. Then north. We will take small roads and not speak in big places. I will send word to Jon Arryn to meet us near the neck. He will know how to say things to the king." "Menadesen. Robert," Lyanna said, and wind salted her lips. "Say his name so I know which man you mean. I would not like to find I have spent my fury on the wrong one." She fell silent for a time, the breath a rasp again. "He will look at my face and not see it. He will see the girl in the Winterfell yard and think me her. He will look at the child and not see him. He will see only his enemy's son, or he will pretend he does not. Those are both failures." And Eddard had no answer he could set in a clean line. "We will make the best lie into a truth," he said at last. "Better that than the best truth made into a lie." He took her back to the cart. The baby was full and solemn, eyes the milky blue of new sight that knew no targets yet. Eddard put a finger gently into the tiny hand and felt it close. The strength of that was a miracle and a worry. They crossed the Vaith on the third day, when the river remembered its own name and swelled into a mirror of sky. There Gerald Hightower took his leave with Oswell went. The Lord Commander's face was not a thing made for farewells. It broke whatever it broke in private, if it broke at all. He saluted with 2 fingers to his brow, a slight bow on the horse that might have been to Eddard as easily as to the oath that had wedded him to kings. "Take your winter," he said to Arthur Dane, and then to Eddard. "Words make obligations. Remember which you have spoken." "Then I remember all of them," Eddard replied. And they watched the 2 white cloaks ride away into heat that ate them slowly until only the idea of them remained. Arthur Dane stayed. It might have been only to recover strength before turning back to Starfall, or because Dawn would not go there without him. But the road wound them together with a patience that did not feel like chance. They began to speak in the mornings when Lyanna slept, and the child dozed like a small sun not yet ready to rise. "Men will make this into a story," Arthur said once, his cloak riding pale against the brown of the land. "And in that story I did this or that, for a reason that can be told in a line. But there were only hours. The hours were like weather. I stood where I stood when one of them rained. And I will not sing it," Eddard said, keeping his eyes on the road. "I do not sing the trident either, and it would sing itself if it could." "You were there," Arthur said. He did not ask a question. "They will pretend they know how blood moves in water. It will be more comfortable if they do. The truth is the river does what it does, and men stand in it and call the water by the name of their brothers." "Benderol. They died," Eddard replied, and his voice scraped in his throat. "Brandon. Father. Men I brought here. I will call the water whatever I wish to make of that." Arthur's mouth did its small tilt again. "Fair," he said. "I am very weary of fairness." He looked ahead, where Lyanna's cart rocked, and his face softened by the width of a fingernail. "My sister," he murmured. It could have been a prayer or a memory. "Ashara." Eddard said nothing to that. He felt the rumor like a burr under his shirt. There were matters a man left for their own hour. Starfall rose out of the red land in a spill of white and lavender, a place where stone remembered water, even when no water ran over it. It was smaller than Eddard had imagined and stronger. The Danes' banners were out with sun on them, the falling star on a field that had kept its color better than any man's name. Squires ran with flustered faces and lithe legs. In the courtyard they were met by a woman whose eyes were the color of dusk when a summer storm has taken all the light and left only a smoldering in the clouds. Ashara Dane walked with that particular grace women have who have learned to carry the weight of their names without showing their shoulder under it. She looked not at Eddard Stark, but at the thing wrapped in cloth that Eddard could not keep himself from protecting with the angle of his body. When her gaze moved at last, it peeled him like a blade might peel a fruit. "This is your doing?" she asked Arthur, but her eyes did not leave Eddard's. "My doing would have looked different," Arthur answered. "This is the desert's doing, and a Stark's oath." Ashara's mouth curved. "The desert does nothing but endure. As for Stark oaths..." She lifted one hand and let it fall, too wise to speak a whole sentence where messengers might carry it. "Come inside. There is a hall that remembers how to hold a northern guest without cracking." Now, they brought Lyanna to a chamber that smelled of lemon oil rubbed into the panels of the shutters. The bed there was a Dane bed, cooler than the towers, and the sea was a rumor in the stones at the edge of hearing. Lyanna slept a great deal, but the sleep was no longer the hard, empty thing of fevers. It curled and unfolded like a cat learning a bed. The child thrived. Eddard watched him do each small thing with the attention of a man, studying a map that holds no roads, and yet promises to lead away home. Howland Reed, who had once watched tadpoles become frogs, as if he were watching a holy transformation, watched the child with the same patience and the same care for the detail of breath and limb. Ashara Dane and Eddard came upon each other in corridors and courtyards, like two travelers meeting at a crossroads neither had wanted. She did not speak to him of rumor, and he did not speak to her of the day she had stood on the dais at Harrenhal, while her brother wore the sword he would one day not draw. They spoke of the blade that sat now in a place of pride by the high table, and of whether the weather would break, and about the way the stars fell in Dorne differently than in the north, as if they had longer to learn the dark and fell slower for it. Each of these was safer than the thing that sat between them like a guest at supper. 2 nights in, Eddard found Arthur Dane alone in the god's room. That was not a godswood, but did what it could with stone and the whisper of water brought up out of the ground, to please either strange god or familiar habit. The sword lay across Arthur's lap again. He was not praying to it. He was resting with it, the way a man rests with a friend on a step when the night is too warm and the little pains complain, even when the big ones are quiet. "Will you go back to King's Landing?" Eddard asked. "To what?" Arthur said. "To wear white for a crown that has changed its head? To be told what vows mean by men who have never made one they could not barter away? No. I have no talent for these courts. If I go, Gerald will tell me what to do, and I will do it, and then I will be used until the using breaks something you cannot mend. I will stay here, if my liege permits it, and see if my house can make a use of me that has no color in it, but the color of our flagstones." "Dandy." Eddard nodded. "That is wise." "It is cowardly," Arthur corrected. "But perhaps it is a cowardice that will leave better bones behind." He glanced up. "You will go north." "I will." Eddard looked down at his hands. The map of scars there was a new thing. "With my sister and my son." "Your son," Arthur repeated coolly. His eyes said what his mouth would not. "A liar is a necessary thing and a sad one. Name the boy what you must. Forge him. Hide him. I will not come seeking him. I will ask one thing, and then I will not ask again. Raise him to fight well, not to love fighting. If he must be a sword, make him a good one. If he may be a plowshare, make him a happy one. A poor man's harvest is better than a prince's funeral." "Bam?" Eddard swallowed. "I will try," he said. "Ashara," Arthur said suddenly, as if the word had been waiting on his tongue for a long time and had finally gotten tired. "There will be talk. There is always talk. Talk is like flies. It breeds on anything. When you are gone, there will be more. I will not run these flies out of my hall with a blade. You will not return to do it for me. The flies will do as they do." He lifted his head toward the hall where dawn shone faintly in its place. "Let the sword do the shining. Stark. Leave the rest be." When they left Starfall, they went at dawn, before the heat gathered. Ashara stood above them on the balcony that looked toward the high road. She did not call anything down. The fabric of her gown lifted and fell as the sea withdrew its breath and gave it back. Arthur Dane rode to the edge of his land, and then turned his horse and sat, not saluting and not turning away, simply staying until they rode small, and the hills took them. They went by broken roads and old goat tracks. Eddard wrote 2 letters at a way house, where the woman who brought them water spoke only 3 words of a language Eddard failed to learn even that morning. To John Arryn, a letter that said very little and meant much, and to Catelyn Tully Stark, a letter that said almost nothing and only begged patience and faith. He did not tell his wife about the child. He did not tell her about the truce. He did not use the word Targaryen. He wrote instead about the heat and about Howland's habit of muttering to the mule, as if it were a lord, and about his longing for snow. When he sealed it, he felt a tremor in his hand that he did not show to anyone, not even to the wind, which would have made a feast of it. This was a long road, and it had a way of stretching itself like old taffy whenever hope was too keen. Lyanna improved outside of the worst heat. She began to smile at odd moments, like a girl catching herself out in some small theft of pleasure, and she would wake Eddard before the dawn to point at a strip of sky where there was not yet light and say, "There, Ned. There. That color is a northern color. Don't you see? It's like the undersides of the clouds when the snow is nearly on you." He would say that he did, even when he did not, because his promise was a house he had to keep standing each day. In the Reach, everything changed the way air changes in a house. When you open a window on a fever night, the fields rose fatly, and the hedgerows were so green Eddard's eyes hurt for it. They went like thieves through plenty. Not all doors opened to them. Men had begun to count victory and loss differently now that King Robert wore a stag that had fought and won. The banners that once had been turned backward were being righted. It would be a long generation remembering which way they properly hung. Yet, there were small kindnesses. A miller's wife gave them a loaf of bread that was crusted with seeds that stuck in the teeth like affectionate burrs. A child ran beside the mule and insisted on touching the babe's foot, and then ran away shrieking with triumph as if he had touched a dragon and lived to boast of it. A septon gave them a blessing as cautious as a man who has money in 2 banks and hopes neither will fail. In the cool evenings, when they dared build small fires screened with stones and brush, Lyanna spoke of Winterfell as if it were a place she had set aside in a box and feared to open too quickly lest the air would spoil it. She asked after the tilt of the yard and the way light fell across the pond in late afternoon. Eddard told her with a care as great as if she had asked him to count the hairs in their father's beard. Only once did they have trouble that smelled of steel. In a village near the Mander's soft embrace, 3 men with the wrong kind of hunger on their faces stood in the road with staves and knives, and the 2 casual posture thugs invent when they wish you to think they could be persuaded to be human if you would only give them enough. Willem Dustin's hand had been on his sword hilt before Eddard had weighed his choices. But Howland Reed labored his frog voice into urgency and hissed, "Let me?" and walked forward with a limp he did not own. He spoke to them not in any northern tongue but in some cross-bred pattermen who live off others, learn in the lanes of cities and in the fringes of armies. He showed them his empty hands. He pointed toward Lyanna's cart without looking at it. The men looked, then looked at Eddard. Howland did something with his eyes, and then a small thing with his shoulders. Eddard felt something like a fishbone slip down his throat without cutting. The men let themselves be unknowingly diminished. They took bread he gave them in a skin of water, and then they turned and went with the offended anger of men who had intended to be villains and had been conscripted into being only hungry. Eddard did not ask Howland what he had said to them. Some knowledge was a kind of mud. If you took too much of it into your house, you never quite got it out again. They forded the Green Fork at a place where the water knew the shape of boulders, as if they were old friends. Eddard stopped his horse midstream and bowed his head without thinking. The river moved around his legs, and the cold of it bit like a promised winter after a false spring. Lyanna looked back at him from the cart and nodded once, eyes bright as snow hurtling under sun. "We're almost there," she said. "I can smell it. Don't pretend you can't. It smells like home. Moss and iron and sheep and hearth smoke that clings to your hair and never decides to leave. It smells thick." "Almost," Eddard agreed. He did not say what else he smelled. the iron of a crown that would be on his doorstep soon enough. Wearing his friend's face like a helm, the neck received them like a frog slides into water. The air thickened and softened, and the land made more of itself out of less. Howland Reed expanded into it, his shoulders loosening, his breath settling. He became a man among his own secrets, and they were kind to him. His people brought them by night to a crannog set in a loop of sluggish brown water, where the roofline lay low as a whisper, and the fire was so damped it was only an idea of a fire. Lyanna laughed when she stepped down from the cart, and the mud took her boot. She threw her head back and laughed for the first time like a girl since they had taken her out of the tower. And Eddard's heart stumbled and steadied again. There they paused. It was a safe pause, if any pause could be safe for people who were doing their best to outwalk a story. Letters went out like fish slipping through weeds, in the hands of men and girls whose names Eddard did not ask. Somewhere beyond the fog and the thinning rain were high roads and bigger houses, and men who would not understand the mathematics of this truth. Winterfell lay ahead in the dry word a map, and behind his ribs in a place he had made for it. He did not sleep much. On a night when the frogs sang so insistently, the air felt braided with their song. Lyanna found him in the doorway of the Crannog's largest room, the babe in her arms and a shawl pulled around her to make a private world for the two of them. She leaned against the door frame as if it were a tree she had climbed as a child, and now had found again. "You have written to your lord," she said. "The one whose name you gave our boy." "I have," Eddard said. "He will meet us on the King's Road just north of Moat Cailin." He rolled the name in his mouth. King's Road. Lyanna's eyes were difficult to read in this light, but her mouth was clear enough. "It will be his road Tully Fair," she said dryly, not unkind. "You will hold hands with a man you called brother, and you will ask him for mercy from another man you called brother. I will stand and watch to see if they both know how to tell lies that leave a child alive." Mandasiri. Eddard remembered John Arryn then, as he had been when Eddard and Robert had both been boys in need of making. Stern and wry. A man who knew how to count to 10 with his eyes alone and make a child do it with him without saying so aloud. "He is a good man," Eddard said. "Good men have killed men as quick as bad ones," Lyanna answered. "But you have picked him well. He is also a careful man. He may yet give us the space a mother and a baby need." She shifted the child in her arms. He made a soft noise and, unbelievably, smiled in his sleep, a thing so brief and delicate it felt like a coin flipping in a torchlit room. "He smiles already," she whispered, turning the small face up for the air to see it. "Ned, look." Eddard did. He placed one finger very lightly on the child's temple, as if touching a map of a place he would one day visit and did not wish to tear. "He will be stubborn," he predicted with grim familial pride. "We have made a creature who will not do as he is told." "Good," Lyanna said. "Good," in that same way she had said it before. The frog sang on. The mud breathed. Somewhere, a fish rose with a sound like a kiss. "Tell me something you have never told anyone," she added suddenly, catching him with that wild, fierce look she had as a girl, when she had demanded to ride as fast as Brandon. "Something true. Something small. I want to go home with a trove, not only with a siege." "Bah," he thought. He thought of the godswood and the tastes of winter, of snow hard as old cheese on the teeth, of the smell of their father's cloak when he had come in from hunting. He thought of Caitlyn's manner of looking at him in the mornings, when she was too tired to pretend court balance, and was simply a woman who had found herself in a far country. He thought of Robert's roar of laughter that covered grief like a bearskin covers a bloody floor. He thought of John Arryn's hands, which had been warm the day he had said, "You will go now, and you will be a lord about it, and you will not be a boy again until you have sons old enough to bury you if they must." Then he said quietly, "When I was 12, I went to the armory in the night and tried on father's brigandine. It was too big. I sat down in it on the floor because I could not stand up in it, and I laughed so hard I frightened myself." He glanced aside to see if she was disappointed and found, instead, that she was laughing now, in the same sound he remembered, softened only by sleep. "That's good," she said. "Keep that one." She leaned her head against the doorframe and watched the mosquitoes go mad around the tiny flame. "Keep it, and when Robert says he will come with 50 men to claim me for songs and put me on a tall horse and I refuse to go, you can tell him that tale instead of the one he means to hear, and maybe a small human thing will save us a day." The baby breathed an answer only he knew the language of. They went out of the neck with Jon Arryn riding to meet them, gray in the beard and gray in the eye and the manner of a man who had slept in camps too long, and learned to mistrust both comfort and need. He embraced Eddard softly, as if he were hugging a porcupine for a child's sake. He bowed very slightly to Lyanna Stark, and the courtesy was so carefully measured it made Eddard's teeth ache. "My lady," said Jon Arryn. "My lord." He looked at the child, and then looked away in the same movement without a hitch or a stutter, which was its own kind of skill. "You are a blessing to this road," he told Lyanna. "I'm a complication to it," Lyanna corrected, but her mouth bent toward a smile. "You men and your roads. The world happens in the marshes and in the beds where women sweat and curse you and bring your burdens into light. The rest is an accounting." "Bendamar." Jon Arryn's eyes flickered. He took the insult and owned it. "That is so," he said. "And yet, we must go on counting. Robert will come to Winterfell. He will want—" He broke off, this cautious man who had shepherded 2 younger men across a winter of wars. "He will want a world you cannot permit him. I will be there when he comes, and I will turn the words in his mouth when I can. But you must be ready for the ache of what might have been. There is no poultice for that. You will wake with it and sleep with it, and sometimes it will not even be pain, it will be a song you can almost remember all the words to, and almost not remember any. Do you understand me?" He had turned to Lyanna by the end of this, as if Eddard were the delivery, and she the patient. "I was born with a song in my head," Lyanna said. "It is why men decided I was an instrument. I would like to be a person again. Help my brother make me one. Help me make this little person a person. Do you understand me?" "Bendrai." Jon Arryn bowed his head without making a ceremony of it. "I do," he said softly. "May I?" He stopped and lifted his eyes to Eddard in respect. It was an odd gesture to ask permission of a younger man, in the presence of a woman who had shamed them both properly. And yet it was a true one. Eddard nodded. Jon Arryn bent and touched the child's brow with 2 fingers, a blessing a septon would recognize and an old god might tolerate. "Grow," he said to the baby. "Grow into something that is not a malady for the men who wish to diagnose you. Grow into your own hunger. If there must be blood, make it yours to spend and yours to spare. Do not forgive too quickly, and do not remember too well." And now, they parted there with the promise of reunion written in the dust by their wheels. The King's Road took them like a corridor that had been polished by too many feet, and soon they were moving under the shade of trees that heard news before men did. The wind here had learned to carry gossip. It told Eddard in little eddies that King Robert had hunted boar near Derry and laughed at breakfast with a mouthful of bread, and that a gold cloak had struck a farmer who had not moved quickly enough out of his way, and that a girl had sung in an inn and made an old knight weep. The road was alive. It made Eddard feel he was not in command of his own story at all, but only a name being carried by a stream that would take him to a pool, where the water was deeper and colder than it looked. The towers of Moat Cailin loomed and fell away at last, crumbled and moss-bearded and stubborn as an old memory. Eddard felt something inside him straighten as they crossed into land that acknowledged his steps and gave back a faint echo of them. Winterfell rose in his mind before it rose in his eyes. It came in scents first: coal, wet straw, flour dust when a sack burst and a girl laughed, and then in sound, the odd sproing of the old gate chains that had never made a proper noise in Father's Day, and would not for Eddard either, no matter how he saw to them. He did not cry. When he saw the towers at last behind the veil of rain that had come to meet them just there, he did not cry, but he pressed his lips together until he tasted iron, and he said very quietly, "Father," because it was both prayer and greeting. Lyanna said nothing. She was looking forward with an expression Eddard had last seen on her face, when she had dared a winter river, and come out with the frost clinging to her eyelashes like jewels. Winterfell received them. It did not bow. It did not sigh. It opened itself in the way proper places open. A making of room where no room had seemed before. A folding and unfolding of corridors and glances and services. Catelyn stood in the yard with her hair braided in heavy ropes, the color of rich wood in firelight. The line of her mouth was a clenched thing, but her eyes were not unkind. She curtsied and then did not, as if remembering and unremembering both at once. She looked at Lyanna, and Lyanna looked at her, and there was a strip of air between them, in which customs tried to stand, but could find no footing. Catelyn lowered her eyes first, not in surrender, but in a choice of battlefield. "My lady," she said to Lyanna. "Welcome to Winterfell." "Thank you," Lyanna said. Her voice was polite and hoarse. She was a Stark in that moment, as cleanly as if she had pulled the words from the same sword scabbard as Eddard did his courtesy. She eased the shawl aside so the child's face was visible, and she made no apology. The yard breathed. Servants found reasons to look aside, and then found new reasons to look back. Catelyn's face did not change. Eddard watched the way her throat moved once as she swallowed, and then stilled. She glanced at him, and the glance was as sharp and brief as the flick of a knife when a cook checks the doneness of a joint. He answered with the smallest of nods, the one that says later, and also says forgive me, and also says I cannot not. "Rooms are prepared," said Maester Luwin, clattering up with the chain around his neck, clinking like a conversation held in a bag. "Warm water stands ready. There is broth and small ale. The child," he broke off with a pleased sound he did not quite curb. "A fine boy." He caught himself, for he was a man who had learned when to put learning before enthusiasm. "I will examine him by and by with your leave." "You have it," Eddard said, because he had to say something. That first night, a weight settled over the castle that was not merely the weight of weather. It was the weight of being the place where two truths had to learn to share a bed. Eddard walked the yard late with his cloak unfastened. He passed the heart tree, where the faces in the bark followed him, as they had when he was a boy, not with judgment, but with a very old curiosity. He told it nothing. He told the air nothing. He told the stones underfoot nothing. He went indoors again, and found Lyanna asleep at last in a room that had been prepared with such care, it might have been a bribe. The linen smelled faintly of dried mint. The shutters had been oiled to a whisper. The rug lay without wrinkles. The child slept in a small cradle by the bed, utterly certain that sleeping where he slept was the right thing. Eddard looked at him a long time until his eyes burned, and he no longer trusted what he thought he saw in that small face. He lay down beside Catelyn and did not touch her. She did not touch him. They lay like two maps rolled and tied and set side by side on a shelf, and the hour wore itself down to thread. At last she said into the darkness, "A bastard," as if the word were fishbone, and she stopped. She did not finish with the word she could have finished with. Catelyn was a woman who had taught herself not to finish those sentences. "It is not what it seems," Eddard said, and knew even as he said it that there were no words that would tell the truth without killing something. "I ask your trust." There was a long quiet then, and he thought, "Fool, fool," 1,000 times. And then she said, as if she had taken a cup of strong drink and forced it down, "I gave it to you the day we were married. You may not have asked then, but you had it. I will not take it back tonight, because I am not a woman who makes her husband account to her like a steward with the household's coin. But there will be a reckoning of this, and it will be done gently if we can make it so." Her breath came in, went out. "I will be kind to your sister. She is your blood, and now she is mine by marriage. But do not lie into our bed. Lie to kings if you must. Not here. Done now." He turned his face to the ceiling and felt something unclench in him he had not known he was holding with his teeth. "Thank you," he said, and the words were as poor as copper coins given where silver was due. In the morning, a raven came, black and officious, and clucked and pecked as if it would have pecked the letters back into the quill if it could. John Aaron's seal lay cracked on the table before Eddard with a bit of candle wax caught in the thread. The words were exactly what Eddard had expected them to be, and no comfort at all. Robert would come north within a fortnight. He would come with men, and with laughter, and with old stories to put a woolen cover over new arguments. He would come to see his friend, and to see the girl he had built into a shrine in his heart, and to work out how the two might be made to fit into the same room again. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and feathers. Eddard went to Lyanna's room with the letter in his hand and an expression he could not smother. He had worn it in battle, and men had moved out of his path when they saw it, because it said a thing was coming, and would not be stopped by speech. Lyanna was sitting up in the bed with her hair braided clean and damp from washing. Her face pale, but no longer sick pale, alive pale. The baby lay on her knees, examining the day with an intensity that made Eddard want to step back, as if it were looking into him. "He is coming," Eddard said, "because it would be crueler to let the hour find her unarmed." Robert, tied. Lyanna did not flinch. The old Lyanna might have thrown something then. The candlestick, perhaps, just to wake the room into honesty. This Lyanna tightened one hand in the blanket and set her mouth. "Good," she said after a beat in which she could have said any 24 other words. "Then we will start our truths earlier rather than later. I am tired of arranging lies. I was never good at embroidery." "He must not know," Eddard cautioned, the iron taste of fear in his mouth again like a boy caught with stolen sweets. "If he knows, Lyanna." She looked at him, and it was the look of a Stark when a storm is counted, and the doors are barred, and the meat is salted. "He will know nothing beyond what we give him," she said. "But do not expect me to curtsy to his memory of me. I will not give him that lie. I will give him this one." She tilted the child toward him. "Don?" she said, not softly at all. "He is yours. He is yours how the world will hear it, and he is yours how it will never know it. That is the truth we have chosen. We will let the rest be. Now go and walk and put your face in the wind until you look like a man and not a blade." Eddard went. The godswood received him with the sound of leaves whose breath was the same as his when he was younger. The face in the heart tree held him with its bloody eyes, and found the oath in him, and took it without asking questions a priest might have thought clever. He pressed his forehead to the bark. It was not comfort he sought. He sought endurance, and the tree had enough of that to spare any man who was humble enough to ask lightly. When he returned to the keep, men were already beginning to plan where tents would go in the yard, and which storerooms would have to be emptied to make room for what an army calls hospitality. Caitlin stood with Lewin bent over a list, as long as a lance. She spoke briskly and did not glance at Eddard, as if refusing to take her measure from his face. Lyanna later walked the wall walk at dusk with her shawl wrapped tight, the child in a sling at her breast asleep in the warm dark there. She looked out over the fields and the thin little river that had the courage to call itself a river even here. And her lips moved. Eddard knew from the movement she was saying the names of places he could not hear. Little names. Sheepfold and Thresher's Path and Gate, as if to remind the world it existed in the sum of its littles. The blue blossoms she had liked in girlhood did not grow in this season, and Eddard was grateful, for he thought he could not have borne their scent this evening without making a poor job of it. Winterfell settled to sleep. Eddard stood on the steps that led down to the yard. The air held the iron of the coming days as firmly as the black of night. Behind him, a door closed quietly. Before him, the shadows shifted as if making room for someone who was not yet there. He breathed in and out and in again, and in that rhythm there was something of a blade being whetted. No, he thought, remembering Arthur Dayne's words, not a blade, a plowshare. If the gods were generous, the same iron, but for a better purpose. He would scrape the earth with it and make a furrow where a life might grow. The boy slept. The sister watched. The friend rode. A few stars showed themselves above the dark shape of the first keep like the first teeth in a child's mouth. The ravens in the rookery muttered to themselves about seeds and winter. In the kitchen someone laughed, loudly, then hushed, followed by the soft slap of a hand on a shoulder, and a murmured, "Hush, she's sleeping, you great fool." Ordinary life asserted itself in the joints of a larger, stranger life. And for a moment, Eddard let himself believe that this was a kind of strength as worthy as steel. On the morrow, the horns would blow along the outer walls, and their sound would enter Winterfell and make everything in it look up and listen. Robert would ride in with dust on his beard and old songs in his mouth, and the truth of the past would put its dirty hand on the shoulder of the present and push. Eddard let the night spell its last, and then he turned and went inside to find his sister and the child, and the beginning of whatever was to come. The horns blew at mid-morning, long and low, as if in deference to a house that had learned to read meanings in wind before it read them in banners. No sound in Winterfell stayed a stranger for long. This one stepped through courts and kitchens and climbed stone like a man with purpose. Eddard heard it gather itself under the first keep, and then crossed the yard to lay a hand on his shoulder. He stood a while at the window in the solar, and watched the dust take shape far out on the King's Road. A smear of dun that knew how to become horses and men, and, at the center, a dark knot of blue that would be a king if the world was still the world. He did not go down at once. There was a measure to these things. He let Maester Luwin scurry through with a sheaf of names and a chain that clinked like a nest of old arguments. He listened as Catelyn arranged the feast in a voice so even he knew the craft of it. He went to Lyanna's chamber, because promises are sometimes measured not by swearing but by the number of times you go to look on the person you swore to. She was awake and sitting in the light at the narrow window, the child asleep along her forearm, as if strength had been poured there just for him to lie on. The morning made her hair a softer black. It loved her, although she would not marry it. She glanced up when he came in, and he saw at once that she already knew. Her mouth was the line of a bow drawn to a mark she could not see but meant to hit anyway. "He is nearly here," Eddard said, and he put his hand on the child's back without thinking, feeling the small rise and fall as if the world could be measured in that gentle motion and nothing else. Lyanna nodded. "Let him come," she answered. "We will not be the first Stark to stand in the yard and greet a man with too much noise." She lifted her eyes to him, and because it was Lyanna, found a way to let fierceness look like humor. "Do not let him kiss me before I have had broth. I will not meet my promise with a mouth like a stable." Eddard's lips twitched. "I have much power, sister, but not to turn a king's head from a thing he has decided to do." He waited. She did not say more. The baby slept. A little knot of breath and hunger. Eddard bent and touched his forehead to Lyanna's for the briefest part of a breath. She did not pull away. Then he turned and went to the yard, feeling Winterfell's stones count his steps. The gatehouse made a throat for sound, and the sound that came through it was the sound of men who had learned to be loud more easily than they had learned to be quiet. The king's standard led them, a crowned stag on black, and under it a scattering of the colors he had gathered in war. A creek's worth of trout for River Run somewhere in the tide. The sunburst of House Arryn, blinding in honest morning. A few Stormlands devices with a salt-rhymed look to them, as if the sea had been in their carters' mouths all the way north. Eddard stood at the top of the steps with his house arrayed behind him. Benjen was there, long and hawk-faced, wearing his ease like a borrowed cloak, and already looking past the yard as if his mind wandered always to the untidy line of the world. Roderick Castle, with his whiskers like a field in wind. Martin Castle, not far behind, the memory of the South written still on the backs of his hands, and the set of his jaw. Maester Luwin with his chain, and the small, hungry look of his chain, and the small, hungry look of a man. Robert Baratheon did not come into the yard like a cat or a ghost. He came like a storm that had grown fond of one man's body and decided to wear it. He was larger than the last time Eddard had looked long at him, and the fat was a new kind of mail on him. Not yet the full suit it would one day be, but enough to drag him toward grounding. The beard had eaten his face, and the laugh had not learned yet how to share with the things his eyes had seen. He swung down from the saddle as if the earth owed him that step, and then took a second one to clear old pride from his knees. He did not speak Eddard's name. He did not say, Lord Stark, because titles are for men who do not own each other properly. He came up the steps in 3 strides and put his arms around Eddard and banged his hand on his back. Eddard let himself be clouded. The air left him for a moment, under the blow, and came back with a smell of leather and horse and a sweetness under it that was old wine and old blood both. "Ned," Robert said into his hair, and the word was everything they had bought and spent. "By the gods, you are colder than the last time. You've married the snow outright. You chose the south for warmth," Eddard said when he could say anything. "We cannot all be so fortunate." He felt Jon Arryn before he saw him, the way a room feels a window open. Jon Arryn stood a little behind Robert, grave and careful, his hands at his sides as if he did not care to remind the world they were capable of anything else. "My lord," Eddard said to him, and Jon Arryn bowed the inch that fit them. "A king does not come north to be kept at the gate," Robert boomed. "Where is she?" He did not mean Catelyn, though he saw her then, and took her hand and kissed her cheek with a gentleness that might have been his, and might have been something he remembered a better man doing. "You have wed well," he told Eddard, and Catelyn's mouth softened half a degree, and then learned how to soften a little more. "And where is she?" Robert said again, the song gathering at last in his mouth, the one he had been humming to himself since he had been a boy. "Lyanna." He turned and looked past Eddard to the tower, as if the name were written in stone there in a script only he had been taught. "She will see you when she is ready," Eddard answered, and he felt Jon Arryn's eyes move from one to the other and come to rest on him with something that was not warning but was like it. Robert's head came around as if someone had thrown a stone at it. "When she is ready," he repeated, and there was almost laughter there, almost amazement, almost hurt. "When she is ready. She has been 5 years ready in my dreams. Then so. She was 5 minutes dead in mine," Eddard said quietly, and the yard breathed once and settled. "Come in out of the road, Robert. Eat, wash. Let Winterfell be a host before it is anything else." Robert's face did that slow work it did when he remembered he was a man as well as a hammer. He grunted. "Ay," he said, a word like a cup put down too hard. "Ay. Food and drink. And then, Ned, if you make me wait long, I will pull this keep down with my hands." "I will not make you wait," Eddard answered, and that was true enough for an oath. They fed them in the great hall, which took the sound the way a coastline takes the sea, and made it its own. Torches burned even in daylight, because this was the north, and the light had to be made to admit it preferred elsewhere. Robert drank as if he were putting out a fire in him, and had not yet decided whether he wanted it gone. He praised the ale loudly, and called the bread honest, and laughed too hard at a small jest one of the Stormlander lords made about the size of northern women's hands compared to their feet. Eddard watched, and did not watch. He put food in his mouth, and tasted it without knowing what it was. He kept an eye on the doors because the person who must come through one of them would come through exactly when the hour called her, and not when men did. Catelyn sat at Eddard's right, and never once let her gaze slip away toward the tower she could have looked to as an excuse. She made conversation like a good lady, quick and tidy. She asked after Jon Arryn's health in a way that let him say he had a cough in the winter, without confessing it had frightened him twice. And she nodded when he said the veil was what it had always been, a chalice of green with a rim of stone. She spoke to the Stormlord called Caron about hawks, as if she had flown them all her life. She kept her face by force from any flinch when Robert's laugh leaned toward the reckless. Eddard was more grateful for that than he could easily admit. Benjen came and went like a wind across a field. Luwin spoke to 2 men in hushed tones about the way ravens will refuse to fly in some weather, no matter what you threaten. That strange, ordinary life of a house, doing what a house does on the day it must do something it did not choose, went on all around the place in Eddard's chest, where the hours were counted like arrows. Lyanna came when the light in the high windows had gone to a deeper gray, and the torches threw brows and noses into sharper relief. She did not dress herself as a queen, and she did not dress herself as a penitent. She wore a clean gown the color of stone after rain. Her hair was braided in a way Catelyn had shown the maids, not grand, simply neat, as if order were a quiet defiance. She came in with the child in her arms. The hall felt the child enter, as it would have felt a snow squall move in under the shutters. Conversations faltered as though they had encountered a drift. Lyanna did not hesitate. She walked down the length of the hall with her chin set and her eyes on the high table. And if her step slowed once, Eddard did not see it. He only saw Robert rise as if a giant had pushed him from his chair. "Lya," Robert said. And it was a name he did not have a right to. But men keep the names they train their mouths to say when they are boys. He took 2 steps, and then a third, which was slower. He stood before her. He did not reach for her. For that alone, Eddard was grateful to gods new and old. The noise in the hall accordioned and became small enough to set aside. Lyanna looked at Robert Baratheon as if he were weather, and perhaps to her he was. "Your Grace," she said. She would have said it that way if he had been still only the boy from the south who had known how to split his lip on a laugh. She would have said it that way if he had been a mason coming to repair the yard wall. The respect owed was given, and none that was not. She dipped her head. Just, and the small movement made the child stir and resettle and stretch his fingers, the lids fluttering briefly without waking. Robert stared at the child. Something went through his face. Wonder and perplexity, and a hot, quick, something like jealousy, and a cold, hard, something like fear, and then was gone into the beard. He looked at Eddard, and then back at Lyanna, as if some treachery had been attempted on him with words. "Whose is that?" he asked, and the hall cleared its throat at once because that was not a king's sentence. That was a man's cry of the heart. "Mine," Lyanna said, and it was as deft a truth as Eddard had ever heard. Robert's eyes flinched. "Yours," he repeated stupidly, then dragging sense back by its heels. "And the father?" "The boy of Winterfell has a bastard," Lyanna answered levelly. "It is not unheard of. The North breeds men." A sound escaped Robert then that might have been laugh, and might have been a poor man's version of one. He turned and looked at Eddard again. There was a question in it that had been a blade in other hands. Eddard took it with empty palms. "My son," Eddard said. The words were easy. They were a rope he had already taught his mouth to climb. He did not flinch. Robert scrubbed at his face with one big hand as if the beard were something he could wipe off, and be a different man for a minute. "Well," he said, mastering a king's tone by violence to himself, "we cannot all be priests. I'd drink to that boy's health." He called for wine, and it came. He drank and thumped the cup down. "I came north to take a bride," he said then, and the wine changed nothing essential in him. "I came to take the girl I loved since I could make a fist." He swallowed, and the sound of it was not small. "I see only a woman who has been through a war the way a house goes through a winter. I see." He stopped. He had not meant to say that aloud. Jon Arryn's hand twitched, the smallest thing, and a few men in the hall looked down at their trencher bread, as if it had suddenly become complicated. Lyanna took a breath, and let it out like a woman lowering a sword point without putting the blade away. "You will never have the girl you loved, Robert," she said. "She died. You killed the thing she lived in without touching her. There is only me. I will not be what you have built in your mind. I will not let your song make me deaf to the boy in my arms." She looked at Eddard then, just briefly. And in that look was an apology and a warning and a gratitude he could not unpack, not there. She returned her gaze to the king. "I am a Stark of Winterfell," she said, and for a moment the words hung in the air with frost on them. "I will not go south to gild a thing that is already tarnished with too many lies. If you want a wife, look to the women who have learned to live in your court and breathe that air and call it truth. If you want to make peace with what was, do it like a man, not a boy shouting at ghosts." "Nebn?" The hall had gone so quiet it could confer thought to stone. Robert's mouth worked, then settled. For a long moment, Eddard thought he would do the thing that Robert had done before when men have fumbled his pride. He would roar and fling the head given him by lords down at the ground like a battering ram. But this was not the ford of a river, and the girl was not a mail-clad enemy. She was the measure of his better self, and worse. He looked away, took a slow breath, and then another. And when he looked back, the boy in him had retreated far enough that the man could stand without shame. "You have not changed your tongue," he said, and there was a rough affection under the injury. "Gods curse me, you never did know how to say the easy thing. All right. All right. We will not settle this in a hall. Jon." He turned. "My lord hand, I need your carefulness." Ned, your godswood. Let us leave these people their food. Eddard inclined his head. It was a small victory to have the place chosen. It was the only one he would ask for. The godswood drank them, as it drank anything men brought into it. It made things wetter and colder and truer. Robert stopped under the red leaves and put both his hands on the face cut in the heart tree, as if he would press his own scars into its scars. The sap looked old and new both. Jon Arryn stood at a remove, neither presiding nor observing. He was a shepherd of men still, and this was a pair of rams he had brought to the same pen with an eye to lambs. Not blood. You should have told me she lived, Robert said at last into the oldness. You should have sent a raven that said not only that the war was won and that we had to count up what winning means, but that the one thing that made any of it any kind of sense was still breathing. I would have flown north in my shirt. Then? I sent ravens, Eddard said quietly. They said what they could say without making your crown confess to something it cannot carry. She was fevered. She might have died the next day. I would not make of her a piece in your court before I was sure she could live in your hall. In my hall, Robert said bitterly. I would have given her a palace. I would have given her any damned thing she asked for. And now one. She would have asked you for the truth, Eddard said. You would have not known how to hold it. Robert's laugh was a bark. Ah, Ned. He looked at him with more sorrow than anger now. She has a child. She does, Eddard answered. And there was the small grace again, the target both men could point at without the beam between them splintering. He is my son. Robert's eyes searched his face. A king learns early, or dies early, how to read a lie. Robert had always been more battering ram than locksmith. He squinted as if truth were far off, and he meant to make it come nearer by force. Your blood, Ned. My son, Eddard repeated. And Jon Arryn's breath made a sound like a small cough. It was not. It was a privacy granted in a yard, grown suddenly too small. Eddard looked at him, and saw not only the man who had raised him from boyhood into something else, but an older man, who understood how much strong men can be made of omissions. I will not put him into your quarrel, he said to Robert softly. It is done. I ask your friendship and your blindness in the same hour. I know I am greedy. Aye, Robert said, and there was a shiver in it of humor again. Like the top of an axe blade when a man finds he has not struck bone. He turned from the tree. I know no child in the world who deserves a man's fury, he said too roughly. I have had my look at dead children, and I have had enough. I tell you this. I will hunt Targaryens until there are none left to spit in our soup. But I will not look under your roof for them. He took a step closer. Is that enough for you, Ned? Will you ask more of a man who has given you a crown? Eddard bowed his head, and tasted gratitude, and something like despair in the same mouthful. It is enough, he said, and forced himself to make the word solid. He could not relieve Robert of his hatred. He could only ask him to set it down before this door, and not pick it up again until he had passed out of Winterfell's walls. Robert's hands opened and closed. He shook his head once, then twice, as if loosening water from his ears, and he was the man Eddard had chosen in the yard at the Eyrie again for a moment, head high and eyes clear, and the laugh a promise and not a weapon. She will not come south with me, Robert said. And it was not a question. She will not, Eddard agreed. She was promised to me, Robert insisted, softer now. A boy repeating a catechism. There had been no priest to teach him properly. We were all but wed. Eris ripped that out of me along with, well, what is a promise worth now that the promise maker is king? He smiled without much teeth. No, do not answer. I do not like the shape of the truth you carry for that. Jon Arryn spoke at last, because a third voice is sometimes the sound a bridge must hear to hold. You have both won something and lost something, your grace, he said. It is a rare day men are wise enough to call it fair. We must make of it not a rope to hang ourselves, but a thread to tie a thing together that will hold. Lady Lyanna is a lord's daughter. She is a sister to your friend. She is no friend to a court that has already eaten too many of her father's hours. Let her be. Take what you came for, that is not her. Ben Dowland. What did I come for that is not her? Robert asked. There was more heat than sense in the words. And then he realized their shape, and laughed at himself. I came for my friend. I came to put my hand into his house and pull him south so he could drag me out of the mire when my boots make a fool of me. He put his hand on Eddard's shoulder and squeezed until Eddard felt bones consider their names. Will you come, Ned? Not now, I know. Now you must stand at a door and keep a storm out and let in the guests who need warming. But when I have built my chair straight, and when the lords have stopped whispering the way mice do in a wheat bin, will you come to King's Landing and look me in the face when the wine tells me I am a god, and say, no, you are a tired man and must sleep. When that day comes, I will come, Eddard said. He did not promise he would like it. Robert released him. He breathed in the godswood air once and made a face. I have forgotten what trees smell like when they are not made into a wall or a table, he admitted. And there was a young man under there again for a heartbeat. By the gods, Ned. She is alive. Do you know what that does to a man who has eaten death for breakfast until he can taste nothing else? He did not wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and went back toward the hall with a stride that wanted to be a charge. Jon Arryn waited until Robert's steps had lost themselves a little in the stone. Then he looked at Eddard and at the heart tree, and then back at Eddard again. You will need to teach your house how to do this, he said simply. I have barely taught myself, Eddard answered. But there is no better teacher than a day that does not care whether you are ready. Jon Arryn inclined his head, pleased by the shape of that, and left him there to make a prayer with his forehead against the bark, and no other witness but sap and old blood. The afternoon unfolded into the quiet chaos of hosting a king who had not come for ceremony, but had brought it with him, regardless. Catelyn kept the rooms moving around him properly, and did not let the servants learn fear. Lyanna allowed herself to be seen at intervals that were careful and sufficient, like a woman showing the hem of a gown to prove it had been properly sewn. She did not hide, and that made hiding unnecessary for all the people who wanted to do it for her. She walked under the towers with the child in the sling Johanna, the stoutest of the Winterfell nurses, had fashioned with a competence that would have shamed a seamstress in Old Town. Men who thought they would gawk found themselves looking at the sky instead, as if clouds had suddenly begun telling interesting lies. Benjen came to Eddard in the stables with his hair still damp from a surprise rain, and the horse smell leaping off him like a friendly dog. Will you tell me now, he asked, not cumbrously, what you will not tell the yard? Eddard stroked the flank of the mare in an emotion his hand remembered from childhood. Well enough it was an answer, and not a thought. No, he said honestly. I have told Lyanna's truth to the part of the world that would not kill it. The rest I will tell to no man, not even one who shares my name. Benjen accepted that, and then did not, which is the way of brothers. He leaned against the stall door and looked down the row of horses. I am going to the wall, he announced, just as quietly. Eddard did not pretend he had not felt that in the way Benjen had walked the yard, and in the shape of his silences. When this is done, when the king has roared and gone down the road and left his echo, there is too much in me that wants to move and not enough to tell me where. The wall is a place that tells men where to stand. I am not made for courts. I do not care for the manner in which men sit their chairs and measure their words in cups. At the wall they drink and die and are honest about both. Benjen? You could stay here and do the same, Eddard said wryly. Benjen smiled with that swift foxish turn that had undone strict women at Winterfell since they had been girls. Here they would call me lordly, and I would grow proud for nothing. Better to go where pride serves only to make you cold faster. He sobered and put his hand on Eddard's wrist. You will have a house that must learn a new story. Let me do this one good thing by leaving you a little space. I am a good brother, he added, which sounded untrue and was true in ways men who write histories refuse to spend their ink on. Eddard closed his eyes a moment and then nodded. When you go, I will come with you to the King's Road. We will drink once for the road, and then you will not look back. Ah, Benjen said. But I will. I will pretend not to. That is enough. He released him then, and went to see to a girth that had had the bad grace to fray. The day did not cut one big wound. It made many small persuadings upon all the people who had to meet it. Willem Dustin sent a rider for Barrowton, with a letter that Eddard did not ask to read. Martin Castle watched over the king's men with an interest that said he would memorize their names not for courtesy, but because names are maps you will later need. Howland Reed kept to the shadows, and then did not, speaking to two men from the Stormlands with an ease that made them laugh at the sound, as if frogs could be introduced to them as a new kind of music. Maester Lewin examined the child with a magister's neatness, and then made a sound in his throat that embarrassed him. A helpless little murmur that meant he was pleased, and told Lyanna the boy was sound as good oak and greedy as a pup. Lyanna slept in the afternoon with the window unlatched, and the small sounds of the castle coming and going like weather in the bedchamber. Eddard stood once in the door and watched her for a long time. There was no poetry to it. There was only a sister who had not died, and a child who had not been made a weapon, breathing. When evening gathered into itself, and the last of the king's men had found places to lay their heads and their armor and their grudges, Robert asked to walk the walls. Eddard went with him, because that is what you do with old friends. You let them remember the ways their legs once moved. The wind up there held a colder rumor. The fields lay in their ordered shabbiness beyond the moat, and the godswood hoarded shadow under its leaves, as if anyone would ever try to buy it. Robert put his hands on the parapet and leaned, not looking down, but out, as if the land would give him the answer he could not bully from a woman. "Do you love her?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself perhaps as much as Eddard. "Of course," Eddard said. "It was too easy, that one." Robert made a frustrated sound. "You know what I ask." "I know what you think you ask," Eddard said. "I love her as a brother. I have never loved her as you do. I have loved you as a brother too, and I have not always loved you wisely." That was as close as he would come to an admission of what any of them had done with the days given to them. Robert turned his head and studied Eddard's face as if there were words written there in an ink only left-handed men could read. "He does not look like you," Robert said, and the cruelty of it was unmeant and exact. "The boy. He has been alive long enough to look like only himself," Eddard replied. He did not let the brief, blind panic in him show. He had practiced not showing it so well. He could have taught the lesson in a tent to a room full of boys with unscarred faces. "You always were a poor liar at games," Robert mused, not unkindly, "and a good one when you wanted to save a man from himself. Well, I have looked into the faces of children and seen my sin come back to me, made smaller and more terrible by it. There will be no more of that under your roof. I have roared at fate enough. I am too tired to roar at a cradle." He pushed off from the stone then and stood straight again. "When I go south, I will take your brother-in-law from my hand. The Eyrie breeds the kind of patience that keeps a king from falling into wells he digs for fun. I will need that even more now that I have been told no to my face by a woman who has the right to tell me it." He glanced sideways and grinned with half his beard. "Do not go soft in your comforts up here, Ned. The day will come when I will pull you down to the city and make you share my stew. Then you can pity me in person." "Nen? I will call it pity if it keeps you honest," Eddard said. And Robert laughed properly then, a big sound that knocked a crow from the crenellation. When sleep came to Winterfell that night, it came as a guest still learning the house. Eddard lay awake a while longer than he liked, listening to Caitlin sweep and settle her breath into the pattern he had come to know. He wanted to speak to her then. This woman he had married as a duty and learned to live with as a man might learn to love the river he fishes, for the way it can kill you and feed you both. But he did not. There are words that cannot cross from the throat to the air without bleeding. He let the dark have them and let the bed judge his honesty by warmth, not by confession. Sometime before dawn he slept. The next day held the new hungers of men who had exhausted the first ones. Robert wanted boar because men are foolish in that way when they have had their pride nicked. He wanted to careen through the woods with a spear and remember the parts of himself he liked best. Winterfell's woods were not the king's wood, and the keep's boars were not the fat, lazy kings of the south. But there were enough bristles in the underbrush to satisfy a need to make a beast run. Eddard let it be arranged. Robert rode out with Roderick Castle and Martin, and a clutch of Stormlanders who handled spear shafts like lovers. Eddard did not go, because the king was not the only animal that needed seeing to. He watched them go through the gate and vanish into trees that had learned to hold men without harm. And then he went to find Jon Arryn, because a man who invites himself into a storm owes someone a talk about roofs. They spoke in a small room off the kitchen that had been built for storing flour, and had since learned to hold secrets better than sacks. Jon Arryn sat at the table and warmed his hands around a mug he did not drink from. He looked older than the day before. Men often did, after speaking in a godswood. Perhaps the leaves pulled truth out of them and left them leaner. "I will not ask you to tell me a thing I can see you mean to guard," Jon Arryn said at once. "There are matters a man keeps between himself and a tree. But there are other matters, and we should set them in a line. Robert will not forget being refused. He will forgive, because he must, but he will not forget, because he cannot. You will not change Lyanna's mind, and if you tried, I would be ashamed of you. We must make of this something that gives, rather than takes." "Bendaro, you speak as if we had coins to mint," Eddard said, and the old man's mouth twitched. "I have thought of politics that way since I was weaned," he said. "A coin gets you something, but it also carries a stamp of the hand that made it. What will you give the realm in place of a queen it has lost, and a princess it never had?" "Bah." "My house," Eddard answered at once. "It will have the north, steady and uncomplaining. It will have that, if you live long enough to teach it by example," Jon Arryn said. "And it will need more. If the king cannot have a Stark bride, he must have a Stark vow he can wear like a ring. You must be seen before the lords to choose Robert over any man who thinks to test him. There will be tests. The Lannister lions have already put their paws onto the throne room floor and called it sunbathing. The Tyrells will pretend they have no interest in the smell of a crown. Stannis will be an honest thorn. Renly will be a flower, which is more dangerous than it sounds. Dorne," he stopped. There was an ache there. "Dorne will be what it must be, and I cannot blame them for it. Your sister's boy is not a coin we should spend in that counting. So we must make other currency." "Robb," Eddard said, and the name felt like a prayer and a hazard both. "My heir. He is not yet here. He is a hope in my wife's hands. But he will be a boy and a man, and he will wear Winterfell as if it were not a garment, but a second skin. He will be the thing that makes this time into a beginning instead of merely an end." "Bow." Jon Arryn nodded. "And the girl your lady will bear after, and the boy after that. Children are a kind of policy stubborn men understand." He set the mug down at last. "Keep the boy Lyanna carries as close to your heart as you dare," he said. "And if he had any idea of whose blood ran under that soft skin, he did not confess it to stone. Give him a place that is neither high enough to tempt a ladder, nor low enough to break a man's spine when he stoops to it. Teach him honor, as if it were a trade. Do not teach him ambition. Do not teach him to sing of dragons to the wrong ears. If ever a day comes when the songs of those creatures are sung in the wrong halls again," he shook his head, "I am an old man. Forgive an old man his superstition. I will raise him as a Stark," Eddard said. "Not a dragon. The snows of Winterfell do not remember that word kindly." Jon Arryn smiled with half his mouth. "No," he said. "They do not." He stood, and the chair made that small, unoffended sound that good chairs make when their task is over. "I will take the king south tomorrow, or the day after, when I have lengthened the leash on his temper. I will leave you all the quiet you can make of a house full of men who will refuse to stop talking about last night. Use it. Make a shape of it your wife can bear to live in. Then the tea." He had the right of that. Eddard went from him to Catelyn, and found her in the nursery with old Nan and two girls folding linen into rectangles, with a care that could have been prayer. Catelyn dismissed them with a word, and then stood with her hands on the back of a chair and looked at Eddard until he felt himself weighed again, as he had in the yard on the day of his return. He told her what he could tell her, that Robert had been refused and had not turned the refusal into a killing blow, that Jon Arryn had helped turn a storm into rain, that the house would stand and the king would not push it down with his hands. He did not speak of the godswood beyond what she already knew. He did not speak the word that lodged in both of them like a splinter. I am with child. She said evenly when he had done, and it was an odd kindness to be told. As if it were only news that had a proper place on the table. He went still, and then came to her, and put his hands on her shoulders, and felt the solid, human truth of it under his palms. This too would be one of the ways they would live through this. I will make a place where all of this can breathe, he said. And he did not care how foolish that sounded to any god listening. He would try. That was the shape of a vow he could keep. Robert's boar returned to Winterfell on the shoulders of 3 men alive and 1 dead, which is how such beasts usually return, one way or another. The king roared his pleasure, and then, alone for a small minute in a yard, with his hands bloody and his breath up, sagged like a tent with 1 rope cut. He did not look at Lyanna when she crossed the yard with the child in the sling. She did not look at him. The moment went into Winterfell's stone with the others, a vein of experience future men would tap, without knowing what they were drinking. That night there was feasting again, because a keep cannot count only the solemn hours, and still deserve to be called a home. Robert was brilliant again at the table, and heavy again when he rose from it. He kissed Catelyn's hand, and praised the cook, as if praising a soldier. He called Benjen a thin wolf, and told 2 boys from House Glover a story about a horn that no man could blow that ended with Robert blowing it, and breaking his lip, and then cursing the horn for its insolence. The hall laughed. Eddard laughed. Lyanna did not. She sat with her son, and ate slowly and politely, and excused herself when the hour was right. Robert watched her go and drank, and did not drink enough. In the small hours, Eddard woke to the sound of a man walking the yard alone. He knew the sound without going to the window. It was the way Robert had always walked when he had a thing that had lodged in him, and he could not dislodge it by speech or drink. Eddard lay still and listened to it, fade and return, and fade again, and it reminded him of winter wolves calling one another, not unkindly, not kindly either, only because the night is large, and their throats are capable of it. At dawn the king came to say his goodbyes to Lyanna. There was no ceremony to it beyond the courtesy she allowed, and the respect he remembered. He stood in her chamber doorway and did not cross, which was its own kind of bow. She looked up from the child and let her mouth make its most honest shape. The line of peace a woman borrows for an hour when she knows the day will ask much of her again. You are as beautiful as the day I first wanted you, he said simply. And as far. I am as near, she answered, and there was pity in it, and pride both. I am as near as your hand on my brother's shoulder, and your mouth when it has told the truth, and as far as any lie you tell to yourself. Go south and be a good king, Robert. Be good to my brother. Hunt less. Sleep more. Remember that men will kill for you, even when you have not asked it, and that you must therefore be careful with the asking. She shifted the child, and Robert flinched visibly, and then controlled it, because he was not wholly a fool. You thought you loved a dream? She went on. That is no crime. Men do it, and live long enough to tell their sons not to. If I loved a dream too, then let us balance those books and be done with them. Ben no wonder. He reached up then, and touched the lintel, as if he blessed the wood for having kept her. If I had had you, he said softly, almost to himself, I might have been different. If you had been different, she returned, you might have had me. She did not smile when she said it. She did not need to. The truth had done the smiling for her. He bowed then, and went. Eddard met him at the yard's edge, and they embraced less like kings and lords, than like men who had rowed a boat together through weather, and knew where each one's calluses lay. Robert put his forehead briefly to Eddard's, and Eddard closed his eyes, and allowed himself the luxury of memory. 2 boys on a hill with sticks, the hot sting of a welt across a shin. A laugh you did not have to pretend to understand, because it came from the same place in both of them. Keep your snow, Robert said gruffly. Keep your crown, Eddard replied. They parted then. The king's party kicked up the dust and took the sounds of their spoons and their boots and their courtesies with them, and left Winterfell to its proper noises. The ravens watched them go with their clever eyes, and then got back to the problem of being ravens. For a few days afterward, the keep felt stunned, as a man does who has survived an accident and finds he can still taste his supper. The air filled again with the ordinariness all good houses exhale when not provoked. The smack of kneaded dough, the murmur of nurses, the grunt of men at the practice yard, the hiss and spit of fat on iron. Eddard lived inside that as in a cloak. He went to the yard each morning and worked with Roderick until the sweat made a little river at the base of his spine, and turned the day into a thing that could be held. He let Lewin speak at him about grain tallies and the repairs the Southgate still needed. He walked the wall with Benjen at dusk, and did not try to persuade him to change his mind, because love is not a rope you pull to bring a man away from a cliff. He sat with Caitlin in the solar and listened to the weather at River Run, as if it mattered that it always rained on the third day after a heat wave there. Because such things matter when you are knitting a life out of enough small true threads to make it hold. He went to Lyanna, and he did the foolish thing that every man tells himself he will not do. He fell a little in love with the baby, with the way the boy's mouth explored his own fingers, as if discovering had to be done afresh every hour. He did not call the boy by his right name in his head. He did not call him by any name at all. He thought of him as the weight he had chosen to carry, and found himself ashamed to find it light. A raven came from Starfall then, as if time had remembered some business it had with the south. The bird was pale-eyed and sulky. Ashara Dane's hand was not in the writing. A steward had put the words down with that firm, ungraceful pressure of men who are honest bricklayers with ink. Dawn had been restored to its place. Arthur Dane had taken a vow upon the blade before his hall, that until Dorne had reason again to rely upon his sword in the world's business, he would keep it for his house. Lord Ulrich Dane gave his respects and asked, with the courtesy of a man who knew how to make courtesy do more work than swords, whether Lord Stark would care to send any word to Sunspear under seal that might prevent certain kinds of misunderstandings. Eddard read it once, then again, then took it to Lyanna. Doran Martell will not forgive easily, she said, thoughtful, her finger moving idly on the child's cheek, to no purpose beyond touch. Why should he? His sister died. Her children died. Eddard nodded. We cannot pay for that, he said. We can only refuse to pretend not to see it. He dictated a letter in Lewin's patient ear that said what it could and refused to say what it could not. That Winterfell recognized the sorrow of Sunspear as real. That no insult was meant by the return of the Sword of the Morning without a White Cloak's escort. That House Stark would not forget who had bled, and would not spill more blood, and would not spill more blood, would not spill more blood. He sent it, and wished words were a balm that soaked through flesh, not only a bandage that made men look away from an old wound. Benjen left with 5 men, and a wagon, and a stubborn look a week later. Lyanna kissed his cheek at the gate and did not weep. Eddard mounted and rode with him to the fork, where the King's Road went on, and the smaller road to Deepwood branched away. They drank once, as promised, from a skin that had traveled into the world, and back again, and had stories of its own. Look to your nephew for me, Benjen said, and for the first time said the word, without any qualification that might prick the day. I will send you a raven when I have worn enough black to make it feel like a second skin. Eddard gripped his forearm until the bones remembered. And you will come back when you have lost your pride in doing it. Benjen grinned that fox grin and wheeled his horse. Winter blossomed slowly that year like a bruise. The air thickened and thinned, and the sky could not make up its mind. Lyanna walked Winterfell with the child in all weathers, and learned the house in the way only someone who had almost lost it learns. By the weight of each threshold underfoot, by the measure of the steps to the kitchens, By the way the light lies in the bend of a corridor at a certain hour. She took to sitting in the rookery at times, not for the birds, but for the look of the world from that high round. Catelyn found her there more than once, and because she was not a fool, sat with her and talked of small things. Wool, and whether 2 women ought to be sent to Brereton to learn a new stitch, the price of salt from White Harbor, the trick of keeping shutters from swelling in the damp, until they had made between them a set of sentences that did not pretend to be friendship but were too careful to be anything else. One evening, as snow finally took its accustomed seat on the ground like an elder acknowledging his chair, Lyanna handed the baby to Eddard and said, "Keep him," and went to the yard with a wooden sword and took a turn with Roderick Castle. The old knight was gentle as men are who know how to break a person and choose not to. Lyanna's steps were unsure, and then less so, and then again unsure when her breath ran out and had to be called back with a hand at her side. Eddard stood under the covered way with the boy against his chest and watched his sister find something in herself she had mislaid in the south. When she made a small, pleased sound and set the point of the practice blade down, the boy made a snorting noise that could have been a laugh. He was not yet laughing. He would be. The thought was a hearth odd enough to warm a man. In the deep of that winter, a last letter came from the south tied in the bar of a raven's foot. John Arryn's hand was on it, and that would have been enough to make Eddard sit down to read it even if the seal had told him nothing. The words were simple, as suited him. That the king had married a lioness. That the city had learned at once to purr and show its teeth. That there were matters Eddard would hate and matters he would grudgingly admire. That he was to watch his north and keep it untroubled and be ready to come if called. There was a postscript like a man's shrug. Barristan and Selmy had taken white, and if there were any virtues they had to put on display in the Red Keep these days, decency was one of them and honor another. Eddard ran his thumb across that line and allowed himself a moment's strange gratitude for a world that could still put an honest man into a room and leave him there to do his work. He took the letter to Lyanna. She read it and handed it back. "The lioness," she said. She tasted the words. "I do not think I will ever see her. Better so. Some women would have loathed me, and some would have pitied me. I have had enough of both." "You will have more," Eddard said, and she made a face that was nearly a smile. "I will have more," she agreed, "but not under her roof. I will take it here and give back what is mine, and keep the rest as a fox keeps hens." "Dain?" "And the boy," Eddard said softly, and there was no need to finish. She put out her hand and ran a finger over the child's cheek. "The boy," she said. "He will be hale." It was a small word, and it was everything. The years would come. Eddard could feel them sometimes in his bones as a weather coming out of the north. Years in which he would be asked to be a good man in places where goodness is a poor tool and an untrustworthy armor. There would be letters to Sunspear and to King's Landing. There would be groans in the long hall when men told tales after ale, and let the Tower of Joy become the thing men love to make of anything they can't lift with their hands. A song. There would be a boy growing into a name that was both a mask and his own, and there would be other children, and a house that learned to live with several truths under one roof and call it virtue. There would be the old gods and the new. There would be winters and summers, and the space between them that men call peace, and only recognize in hindsight. All that was coming. For now there was the snow giving itself up in snowflakes to the yard, and the smell of peat, and the cry of a baby who was not a weapon in any man's hand, and the remainder of a morning when a king had been told no, and had put his foot in a stirrup and gone away without burning a house down behind him. Eddard took his sister's hand and squeezed it once. She squeezed back. It was a signal as old as their first mischief, and as new as this day, and it held as much as anything they could have said in a hall or a godswood or a yard, which is to say, enough. Okay. The snow held its breath for 3 days, and then gave itself over to the yard, with a soft, stubborn persistence, as if it had been waiting for permission, and now could not be told no. Winterfell took it, as it took anything honest. It let the white lay where it would, and made paths where men must pass, and the rest it left to the patient arithmetic of feet. Lyanna stood at the kitchen door the first morning of the true fall, The baby bundled into his sling and watched two boys push a barrow through powder that tried to make light of them and failed. She smiled without showing her teeth. The cold came to her not as a thief, but a relative, loud and overfamiliar, and welcome all the same. "Go inside," Eddard told her as he came up from the cellars with a list of barrels and a head full of calculations about salt and ale, and the kind of hunger that does not announce itself until you have 20 fewer sheep than you counted in autumn. "You will make Lewin fret." "Lewin frets by habit," Lyanna said. "You would deprive him of his one reliable pleasure." She turned her head so the boy's breath warmed the hollow of her throat. "He likes to waggle his chain at a woman and call it wisdom." Eddard could not help the way his mouth shaped itself toward laughter when she spoke so, because there was something in her frankness that made a man choose either fury or amusement, and he had never found the former fit him. "He is wise," Eddard said. "He is," she agreed, with the kind of fairness she had learned to like in herself. "He is also a mother hen with ink on his fingers." She tilted her head toward the yard. "I am learning my own house again. Leave me to it." He left her to it and went to wrestle with numbers that had more to do with the weather than with men's appetites. The ledger smelled of damp and old quills. He made the marks with a care he had learned from his father and from Jon Arryn both. Each figure set down as if the paper judged him for the future he was building with it. Sometimes he still had to remind his hand not to draw a sword where a pen was required. He could almost feel Brandon at his shoulder then, laughing. "And you were always the dull one, with a dull blade and dull sense both. Give me that. I'll sign away my head faster than you can tally grain," and their father's great hand brushing them both as if smoothing the hair of two boys whose lives he did not know would be so short and so long in ways no man could count. The day Robb came into the world, the snow had gone thin and bright again. Catelyn labored with a silence that had very little piety in it and much of stubborn pride. She had no women from Riverrun to hold her, but Winterfell made of itself a mother's room by duty. Johanna, who had borne 5 and buried 1 and did not apologize for either. Old Nan with the stories she told to the air between pains, not to the lady, because it was not the lady who needed distracting. It was the pain. 2 girls with hands quick and eyes steadied by work. Eddard waited in the passage because he knew the ways he was useful and the ways he was not. Lyanna came and stood with him for a time and did not speak. The boy in her sling slept through his cousin's first name being breathed in the room beyond. When the thin cry rose, high and angry, Eddard's head went back against the stone behind him as if that would ground him. A portion of Winterfell's warmth poured into his arms when they placed the child there, red-faced and indignant and perfect, with fists that declared war on air. Catelyn's eyes were dark with victory and exhaustion both. Lyanna stood at the foot of the bed and smiled in a way Eddard had not seen before. Not wild, not reckless, but satisfied, like a rider who had made a difficult jump and landed without breaking her horse's legs. "Robb," Catelyn said. "The Riverlands in the vowel," and Eddard repeated it as if names were oaths that had to be spoken twice to seat themselves. They took him to the heart tree when Catelyn had strength enough to walk, and the air had gone so still the snow fell straight. Eddard cut his palm with the small bone-handled knife that had served his father for the same rite, and let 3 drops of red go into the snow at the foot of the old face. The tree did not answer. The trees rarely do. But the silence held him, as it had when he was a boy, and pressed his cheek to the bark, to make his fear into something the wood could keep safe for him. Catelyn said her prayers later in the small septet that had learned to be quiet in a northern house. Lyanna came with her as far as the door, and then stood outside with the baby, and watched the candlelight make a warmer weather on the stone. When Catelyn emerged, she put her hand, hesitant and determined both, on the boy's cheek where he lay in Lyanna's arms. "Your brother will be good to him," she said without looking at Lyanna. "And you." "I mean to be good to myself too," Lyanna said. But she said it gently, as if mercy could be learned by practice. A letter came with the thaw. One from Jon Arryn in the king's hand, the script tidy as a hedge. The king had wed, as the raven had already told them, and the queen had taken to court like a jewel to light. There were tournaments planned as if the realm could be told to remember that steel had uses besides war. Barristan Selmy wore white and had already saved a man's life in the yard by putting a blade into the hands of a youth who had thought himself brave for standing up to a drunk lordling. The boy had been brave and had thought it would save him. The new hand wrote that the King's Guard had men in it to be relied upon and men to be watched, and that the watchfulness must be done with discretion. There was a line, quiet and plain, that said, "I have been careful with the question of Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon keeps the island and the law with a severity that makes men fear him and respect him in equal measure. The sea does not love him. He does not love it. That is a rare kind of temperance in a place where ships can carry treason faster than men on horses." Eddard read that line aloud to Lyanna, and she nodded once. Grave. Robert would have loved Stannis better if Stannis had been a man who loved. As it is, he only trusts him, and that is better for us all, she said. Trust sits longer at a table than love does. The winter bit harder for a week, and then broke its teeth on a mild spell that made even the old men talk hopefully. Lyanna took to riding again, slow at first, the child with Johanna or Catelyn, if Catelyn could bear it. The horse she chose was the gray mare they had set aside for her when she was 15, now older and cleverer, with a mouth any woman would be grateful for in a husband. She went out with 2 guards and Howland Reed when he was at Winterfell, and alone with Eddard when he could make time to shrug the Lord's cloak aside. The moor under snow lay like a clean sheet. You did not yet want a wrinkle. She rode across it in a straight line, and then set the horse to a curve, and then to a figure that would have been called a script by a man who loved writing. To Lyanna, it was simply the way a body remembers what joy feels like. It was on such a day that Roose Bolton came to Winterfell. He came as quiet men come, with the right number of riders, with furs that did not shout but declared their quality in the way they fell from his shoulder, with a face that had learned how to listen while others spoke. His eyes were pale like a pond after frost. He made his bow to Eddard with measured correctness and paid Catelyn with a courtesy that did not try to look old-fashioned or particularly warm. He looked at Lyanna and did not look again, which was in its way the truest thing he could have done. To stare at a lady in her brother's hall is to set yourself a foolish problem. To keep your eyes to your business makes you a man who intends to live to conclude it. "Lord Bolton," Eddard said, and felt the old wariness his father had taught without words. "Winterfell is open." "Gracious," Roose said. His voice could have been a physician's. "I bring you the respects of the Dreadfort and the bones of 2 men who froze in the barley stubble before my men found them. We have not had a winter so uncivil to the poor this decade." He paused, then added, "I have also brought a boy. He is no kin to me, but his father has died, and the Dreadfort has no kindness for bastards. I thought perhaps your custom could make something useful of him." Menarmau. The boy he brought was called Jory Poole's cousin in the yard by dinner time. Men make kin out of shadows to give them a better footing, and he was tough and narrow, and looked at the world from under a brow that would fight you before it bowed. Lyanna looked at him once, and then again. "He will make trouble," she said to Eddard later, not disapprovingly. "Good," Eddard said. "We have not enough trouble of the right kind." Roose Bolton ate and drank lightly. He listened. He watched Jon, who had already learned to walk along the rush-strewn edges of rooms like a cat learning the walls of a house, stare at the blazon on his cloak and not be cowed. When he took his leave the next day, he made no comment on the boy at Lyanna's breast, or the other in Johanna's lap, or the way Winterfell's air felt warmer. He did not need to. Men like Roose keep their thoughts to be taken out in private and polished, not thrown into the sunlight to be admired like a brace of trout. From White Harbor came another kind of visitor entirely. A Manderly cousin who brought ivory combs for Catelyn, sugared almonds honest enough to make even Lewin's frown soften, and a letter in Lord Wyman's florid hand that praised the peace of the realm while reminding Eddard that peace without ships is a house without doors. The big man begged as prettily as an elephant might to be allowed to rebuild his docks with northern oak and southern coin, and to turn his gaze toward the Iron Islands with a countenance of good intentions and very little patience. Eddard rode back measuredly. White Harbor was a mouth that must not be allowed to bite even when it smiled. He promised timber, and men to supervise the cutting. He promised also to send Glover men to make sure timber was not turned into boats that might one day be called reavers by someone who did not own them. Late in the spring, a raven with a yellow ribbon, Dorn's color, Lewin said, and his mouth pulled sideways as if he had bitten a lemon, brought a letter with a hand as elegant as a woman's dancing. It was not from Doran Martell. It was from his brother. Oberyn wrote, as a man converses who likes the taste of each word before he lets it go. He wrote of heat like a great cat that sprawls and loafs until it remembers it can kill. He wrote of a city that could crush a man under sense alone. He wrote of a Shara Dane with a frankness that would have made a Stark man throw the inkpot, if the Stark man had not been Ned. He did not accuse. He did not beg. He told Eddard that Dorn remembers. He told Eddard that he, Oberyn, remembers too many things to make any one of them a crusade without lying to the rest. He told him that if the North remembered as well, then perhaps the song that had been made of the Tower of Joy could be kept out of the courts and allowed to fade into the rooms where mothers hush children with tales that end differently each telling. Lyanna read the letter and huffed a breath that might have been the beginning of laughter. "The viper," she said. "I would rather sit down with a snake that shows his fangs than with a man who hides a bite under a smile." "You will not sit down with either," Eddard said, "but you will be spoken of by both. Prepare yourself for that, Lya." And so, I had men speak of me when I could not answer, she said. "Having to answer with my brother at my back is an improvement." That summer men came to the yard to be counted, because men always come to the yard to be counted. There were Karstark boys with wrists like bundles of sticks and laughter that came in a rush and left as quickly. There were 2 Serwyn men with shoulders wide enough to carry a cow between them if you gave them a pole and a dare. There were Umbers who took up space the way the word Umber does in the mouth, blocking other words and making men who use their throats with care uncomfortable. There were Manderly men with hands too soft for the first week, and then less so by the third. There were Glovers who learned their drills with a care that made Roderick Castle grunt satisfied noises and whack them less for the pleasure of it than for the visible progress. There were Boltons too, and Eddard did not pretend he did not see their pale eyes and their quiet scorn for men who moved like hot bloods, and not like a knife you leave in a drawer. Jon tugged a wooden sword through the dust until he discovered it was better used in the air and not dragged like a reluctant dog. Robb drooled and laughed at nothing and at everything, and seized Hullen's thumb with harrowing tenacity. Lyanna came to the yard often and stood in the shadow of the gallery where the sun did not strike her eyes. She let her hands rest empty sometimes, which is a luxury mothers do not always remember they are permitted. When Jon stumbled and fell, she did not cry out. She watched him push himself up and crow at his own triumph, with a pride that made men smile in spite of themselves. "You will spoil him," Catelyn told her one afternoon not to be unkind. "But because women say such things to measure how much truth the other will tolerate, I will teach him to be spoiled by the right things," Lyanna said. "By honor and by stubbornness. Spoiled by the idea that he must get up when he falls. Spoiled by the knowledge that a wall holds if you lean your weight into it, and not if you try to climb over it all your life." "Dandero. Those are not the spoils men mean," Catelyn replied. "Dry. They mean you will let him think he has a right to take what he wants. He has a right to take breath," Lyanna said, and her voice curdled a little. "Men have tried to take that from him already. He is spoiled by the fact that I will break a man's teeth if he tries it again. On the other spoils, we will see. They were not friends, these 2 women, and yet they had made between them a truce the equal of any drawn under a tower on a hot day. They had decided they would not be enemies. That decision turned rooms into rooms again instead of battlefields. The maids felt it. The men learned not to look over their shoulders when one entered a chamber the other occupied. Eddard felt himself grow quieter with the relief of it in ways he had not known. He had been noisy. In the second winter after Robb's birth and the third after Jon's, a wind came off the shivering sea that told men who had ears for it that the ice in lands they would never see had cracked in a new place. The ravens came thick to the rookery that week, black punctuation over the white world. Benjen's hand was on 2 of the letters. 1. A simple list of supplies the watch would purchase if any house would sell them at a fair price. No, a generous price would not be refused. The man who wrote had learned not to be proud where salt pork was concerned. And the second in Benjen's own tight, restless hand, telling Eddard that the men at the wall had begun to see eyes in the trees again. Not the way a man speaks. I do not say what the old men say, Benjen wrote, which was exactly what old men write when they mean to be believed, and do not want to frighten boys. But I say that the woods have a different sound these days. Tell your son when he can hold a bow to practice with his breath, not only his arms. A man who can breathe once when another man breathes 3 times will live longer. And yes, Eddard read that twice and made no official use of it. But after that letter, he went to the yard more often. He let Roderick talk him into drills he had told himself he was too old for. He made boys hold their stances until their legs shook. He stood by the heart tree more nights than he would have liked to confess, and listened to the wind pick at the red leaves with a querulous old voice. Lyanna joined him some nights. Silent, the child a weight sleeping against her shoulder. Once she said into the cold, "We did not give him that other life, and so I will give him this. A place where the old things are allowed to look at him and not hate what they see." She did not say dragons. She never said dragons. Eddard did not either. In the spring, Old Nan told the children a story about a knight who went into the woods to look for a blue rose that grew there in winter, and came back with his hands bleeding, and a smile on his face and a wife with cold breath. Lyanna laughed at that, and let Robb tug at her braid. Jon looked solemn and held her finger in his full, serious grip. "You." She whispered to him, and the smile that crossed her face then was not like a Stark smile at all. It was the smile of some Southron queen listening to a minstrel tell a story, and hearing under it the beating of hoofs. "You will not be a knight. You will be—" She did not finish. Eddard was glad she did not. When Robb began to speak in more than 2-word declarations and Jon's words came quick behind in the peculiar dance of children who share toys and air, the men began to pin the first small names on them. Robb became the one who runs first. Jon became the one who looks first. That one difference multiplied into many. Robb would throw himself against the low wall of the kitchen garden and haul himself over with a grunt and a torn knee. Jon would find the place where the stones had settled badly and put his foot in it and climb without making a tale of it. Robb would laugh before the joke. Jon would smile after it and be more pleased. Robb would strike and then apologize and then strike again out of honest energy. Jon would think where to strike and not strike at all if there was a better way to get where he needed to be. Lyanna watched them both and loved them differently and entirely. Catelyn watched them and loved Robb with that bone-deep loyalty mothers give to the first life their bodies make, and Jon with a controlled discipline she refused to let sour into cruelty. When Jon reached for her, she did not pull away. Sometimes she laid her hand lightly on his hair, almost diffident, as if he were a small animal she meant to tame without frightening. It was not the love he would have wanted in some other house, in some other world. It was the kindness he had. Eddard was grateful for it. On a day when the apples at the edge of the south orchard were tight green fists, and the children were old enough to be turned loose there, with 2 girls to keep them from eating their stomachs into knots, a rider came under a flag of black and gold. Eddard knew the man even before he pulled the hood back. Jory Castle had left Winterfell a boy with pride a half-size too big. He returned a man who carried the pride properly and did not let it slop over. He had been in the south with Jon Arryn's household, keeping northern eyes on southern matters that did not love to be watched. "What color is the city this season?" Eddard asked him when they had eaten and drunk. And Jory had told old Nan that she had not aged at all, and old Nan had called him a liar and been pleased. "Gold," Jory said at once, and read under it, "The Lannisters walk as if they have already paid the rent on the sun. The king hunts and rides and laughs, and is every inch a king until he must sit a chair, and then he is a bear in a collar. The queen smiles like a statue and moves like a cat, and there are men who would throw themselves in a well to watch her draw the bucket. The hand is tired and clever. He says he is an old horse that can be put to the plow without asking him if he wishes to pull. The small folk whisper that when the queen laughs, the laugh leaves marks on the floor. And I am not a man to pay more than a copper for a whisper, but I do not disagree. Lyanna. Eddard let all that settle. And the princes? He asked, though he had meant not to care, not because children are not worth caring for, but because those children were emblem and provocation and pity, all at once. There is one, Jory said. A boy who already plays at being a man and chooses poor men to practice on. I would not give him a sharp thing. There is a girl, kind enough, I think. She is what a court makes of kindness, which is to say she has learned to hide it to keep it alive. There is a younger boy who keeps to the maesters, and seems to love book more than horse, which is no crime, or not in the north where birds fly in winter. There's a small girl who laughs as if she has not been told yet that a laugh is a kind of currency that must be hoarded. The realm is fertile with children, my lord. I do not know if that gives you comfort. Then, it gives me worry, Eddard said. Comfort is for men who have put away their swords and their pens both. He hesitated, then added, and across the narrow sea. Jory's mouth tightened. The last of the dragon brood has been seen in a market in a city no one in the north will pronounce properly. A girl with hair like moonlight, and a brother who does not eat enough. There are men who will sell them bread for the pleasure of seeing them bow, and then curse them behind their backs because they remember a day when such children could burn their houses. If you ask my opinion, I do, Eddard said. They will die of hunger or pride without our help, and we had better give them neither. It is not our way to poison children. It should not become our way. Then see. Eddard nodded slowly. Jory's plainness was a relief. Tell the hand I said as much. I will, Jory said. He drank in a thoughtful way, as if he meant to find some truth in the bottom of the cup, by patience alone. I will also tell him that there is a story in the south that you pulled a woman from a tower with a blade in your hand and a song in your mouth. Eddard stared at him until Jory colored and looked down at his boots. I will not have my house made into a verse, Eddard said softly. It ill suits the north. I told them as much, Jory said quickly. They said songs travel faster than ravens. Then break their legs, Eddard said. And Jory laughed, and let that be the end of it. The summer that followed was a kind one. Showery and green. The boys grew into their feet. Sansa came red as a hollyberry, and sweeter than the smell of clean linen, a Riverland's daughter wrapped in northern peace. Lyanna stood beside the bed and held Catelyn's hand when the last pain racked her, and when the baby cried she smiled and said, We are a house of singers now, it seems. Catelyn named the girl Soft as Snow, and Eddard took the baby to the heart tree, and felt again that old ache that was both prayer and threat. Sansa's first laugh made old Nan clap her hands like a child, and Jon looked up from a scrap of wood he was carving with a concentration that could have cut glass and smiled with his whole face in the way he rarely allowed himself to. Robb ran at once to show Sansa a stick he had decided was a sword. The baby blinked and burped. Lyanna laughed aloud then, and it echoed under the arch and made the guards grin like boys. It was not all peace. There are houses that are most themselves when there is a quarrel to be made kind. The north is one of them. A tanner from the new keep beat his wife, and Eddard had him put in the stocks for a day, and then had the wife brought to the solar, and given coin, and told to leave if she wished. She did not wish. He was not always like that, she said. He is a good man when the hides go well. He has too much pride for a trade that is mostly patience. Give him to the cold for 2 days, my lord, and then give him back to me. Eddard did as she asked, and the man came out of that penitent and shivering, and for a long time his hands were gentler. A boy stole a loaf from the kitchens, and Jon found him under the stairs and shared it with him instead of hauling him up to answer, and Lyanna cuffed Jon lightly and said, Do not steal the baker's rage from him. Men should own their rages and spend them honestly, not hoard them like coins. Jon listened and looked ashamed and did not do it that way again. He found the boy after and put him to work carrying coal, and the boy grew up with a back as straight as a spear and a mouth that told the truth more often than not, which is all any lord can ask. Howland Reed came and went as the marshes decide. Sometimes he brought with him a girl with long limbs and eyes like shadows on water. She was not Mira, not yet, but Eddard could see the way the world was making space for her. The Crannogmen brought news with a different smell to it. They spoke of the way reeds had grown thicker in places they should not, and of a light at night that might have been foxfire, and might have been witchlight, and might have been only men on a wager. They brought frogs and sour sweet drink and a habit of quiet that made men from the hills uncomfortable. Lyanna sat with them and listened to their talk about the old gods that were not made to be knelt to with words, but with weather. "You will not take this boy into your secrets," Eddard told Howland once, when Jon had spent half a day watching the Crannogmen shape a small boat from a hide and a frame, and had gone to his bed with the look of a boy who had discovered that some things float because they like water more than earth. He must have only one set of truths to juggle. Howland's frog-green gaze flickered. "You ask something that is not in a man's power," he said mildly. "Children hear the truths they are hungry for. You may give him meat and hope he will not go to the hedge for berries, but he will. Better to show him which berries will make him shit for a day and which will stop his breath." "Gods," Eddard said. "You are a comfort." "I am a friend," Howland replied, unruffled. "Comfort is another trait altogether." Nights at Winterfell were their own season. In the best of them you could hear a wolf far off like a man practicing a horn in a field, and the wind making the small talk it makes with battlements. Old Nan would seat herself by the fire and tell a tale that had worn grooves in her mouth. The one about the man who ate so much snow, he turned transparent and could be seen only when the spring came and the mud stuck to him. Jon slept with one hand on his own chest, as if making sure he was still there. Robb slept like a dog, sprawled and twitching. Sansa made small, polite sleeping noises, as if even slumber had rules, and she was good at them. And then, as the apples fattened again, and the air went from green to gold around the edges, the Iron Islands remembered the way a man remembers a wrong, and the ravens carried teeth. It was a letter in a tight, ungenerous script, words like nails. Balon Greyjoy declared himself a king, where men wore rust as a color, and called it pride. He had set his tower's fires to talk to their neighbors over sea and stone. And his men had already gone into the Wolf's Mouth, and taken 2 small boats that had the affront to carry White Harbor's flag. There were rumors of salt wives and blood on the decks and boys put to oars who should have been at school. The king sent his seal with a proclamation that had as much anger as law in it. Robert's hand was in the threat. Jon Arryn's tone was in the messaging. The realm would answer. The realm would be seen to answer. Eddard folded the letter, put it into the drawer where dangerous things rested for a night to test their bite, and went to find Lyanna. She knew before he told her. Something in the air changes when a man knows he must ride, and sisters smell it the way wolves smell fear on a deer's breath. She met him in the passage between the kitchens and the armory, and took his sleeve in her hand, as if she could keep him standing in that spot by force of will. "When?" she asked. "When the ravens finish talking," he said. "When the white knife stops bringing boats with boys who have not learned to swim. When Jon Arryn tells Robert to stop shouting and start counting." He kept his voice level. He had become good at making words behave. "Take the boy," she said at once. Eddard stared. "Robb is 3. She looked at him as if he had advised her to brew tea in a helmet. "Not that boy. Mine. Take Jon. Take him with you." Eddard's hand went to the back of his neck without him willing it. "To war. To your side of war," Lyanna said. "Not to your sword. To your tent and your maps and your council. Do not leave him here to be a question men. Ask my sister by marriage with their eyes. Do not leave him to be whispered at in corners and to be taught by fear while you teach Robb, by example, what it is to be a Stark. Take them both, or take neither. If you leave Jon, he will hear the wrong truths in the absence. If you take him, he will hear the right ones and the wrong ones together and learn to sort them. Then, gods," he said again. But the god he meant was only his father's grave face under stone. "He is small. I was small when men decided what to make of my life." she said. Better that he not be made in a house where I cannot stop their fingers. She let go of his sleeve then. Do not argue with me, Ned. I have fought for this child with my breath and my blood. I will not put him into the hands of my friends to be made a weapon without at least choosing the direction of the blade. Catelyn heard the plan and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, carefully, take Robb and leave Sansa then. She swallowed. I will not pretend to like it. But I will not have my son be the boy who stays behind while his father and his cousin go into the world. That would put a flaw in him we would see in 20 years. Damn. Eddard bowed his head. I do not deserve you, he said. And if it was a poor sentiment, it was an accurate one. Roderick put the yard in order. Men came with eagerness, they would curse later. White Harbor sent a dozen with good boots and better hearts. The Glovers sent men who could make the line straighten by standing in it. The Umbers sent giants whose mouths were already singing of salt wives they would be loyal to for 3 days. The Boltons sent gray men with eyes like knives. Eddard chose his captains with a surety that made him ashamed of how much he liked the choosing. He would have preferred never to have learned to be good at this. He was. There are truths about a man that do not ask his consent. The last night before they rode, Lyanna and Eddard took the children to the crypts. It was foolish. The crypts offer no comforts to the living. The statues down there do not care, and they do not bless. But Lyanna had a stubbornness in her that liked to put her feet where she had put them as a girl, and pretend that the difference between then and now could be fought by breathing harder. They went down with a lantern. The air was the same as it had always been, damp and old and frank. The stone wolves at each Stark's feet were the same, their muzzles worn by boys' hands sliding over them. Eddard put a hand on his father's thigh where the stone had learned to shine a little from the touch. Father, he said, because he always did, watch me be a man. Lyanna stood a while before Brandon's effigy and said nothing. There were no words fit for that. She took Jon's hand and set it on the stone where Brandon's wolf slept and whispered, You would have liked the way this one smiles. Jon's eyes were wide and solemn. Robb yawned mightily and declared the wolves were sleeping, and he would not wake them. Sansa slept through it all with her thumb pinned to her mouth by her own cheek, which was a kind of piety. They rode with the dawn, and the yard kept its counsel. Lyanna stood on the steps with Sansa on her hip and watched them go down the long slope to the gate. And if her hands tightened on the child, she did not let it show in her face. The boys were small knots of fur and Will in front of Eddard, on the great gray gelding, Robb chattering, Jon quiet, both eyes bright. Catelyn stood beside Lyanna and did not grip her hand because there were witnesses, and because some courtesies are the only armor women are allowed to wear. They nodded to each other, and it was as good as an oath. The road south tasted of iron and old triumph. Eddard kept the men steady, because that is a lord's first duty in war, not to make them bleed prettily, but to make them walk. Robb tired and then refused to be tired and then surrendered to it with a fierceness that made Isilla, one of the maids Catelyn had chosen to travel with them, laugh into her hand. Jon watched the road and the men in the trees, and the way the sky changed, and learned more than Eddard would ever be able to measure. At night, Eddard spread maps in the small tent he had never grown fond of, and let the boys pull stones from the bowl and set them where they wished. Robb wanted all stones to be horses. Jon wanted one to be a hill, and one a river, and one the idea of a man who would make a mistake. They joined the king's host near Saltspear, the men from the south a riot of colors that made the northern eye go suspicious. Robert's laugh fetched Eddard from his tent like a horn. The king's beard had grown another season of growth, and his belly had gone more honest. He embraced Eddard in the old fashion, and then bent and swung Robb up, as if the boy were a boar spear and Robert an old oak selling gusts for cheap. He looked at Jon and his eyes said something ugly, and then something noble, and then something tired. He put his hand on the boy's head, not ungently. Another wolf, he said. If the islanders have sense, they will go to ground. They have no sense. Stannis Baratheon said, as if he had taken a bite of a sour apple. He stood not 2 paces off, thinner than a rumor and more persistent. We will give them the sense they need with fire and rope. And ships, said a voice that still sounded new to command and ended its sentences as if surprised to have won them. Renly, the youngest, with a face made for women to practice kindnesses on, and men to mistake for harmless. "We will give them ships, brother. We will give them numbers," said Jon Arryn behind them all. And it was like a hand laid on a wheel to keep it from wobbling. Eddard looked at the water and tasted iron, and remembered the last time he had come south, and the sound a river makes when it is asked to wash too much. He looked at Jon and Robb, small with their cloaks hitched up against a wind that loved them not at all, and felt the old decision he had made under a tower in a desert settle into his bones again. What he would do and what he would not do, which part of a boy he would give to a war and which he would keep. He nodded to the king, bowed the inch to the hand, and went to find the Manderly men, for in any war, a man is grateful to stand with those who have ships and hunger both. The sea teaches humility in a voice even Robert listens to. It slapped men's faces and put salt in their mouths and made a sport of good orders by shifting the winds. The Ironmen came out lean and hungry and made a ferocity of their lack of fat. They fought like men who had never had any other language to learn, and in that, they were honest. They died like men who did not want to die, which is another kind of honesty. At the lines drawn in the black mouth of Pike's Harbor, Eddard stood with men whose grandfathers had been proud to say they had never learned to swim, and he thought of Lyanna wrapping Sansa in a fur at the kitchen door, and saying without saying, "Do not come back with songs and not with yourself." He kept his bannermen where he knew they would not show off. He lent Manderly arms to a Glover line that needed a piece of sea sense. He did not let Jon near the breakwater. He let Robb hold his pommel too tight and shiver with excitement, and then scolded him afterward mildly to teach him to keep his face. In the last press before the Black Tower, a man came at Eddard with a sea axe and a grin full of broken teeth, and Eddard did the thing any soldier does without thinking. He brought his sword around in a cut that was honest and unadorned, and killed the man because it was him or Eddard. When the body fell, the grin turned into something that did not resemble anything human, and lay in the spray. Jon saw that and went very still, and said nothing for a long time. That night in the tent, he crawled under the furs, and put his head against Eddard's ribs without asking. Eddard laid a hand on his hair and did not speak either. The sea spoke enough for both of them, and it was not a gentle tongue. They took the island as any island is taken, one hard bite at a time. Stannis chewed on Dragonstone, and would be chewing still if he had had his way. Men like him do not tire of hard tasks, because they cannot forgive any task for being easier. Robert drove the point at Pike himself at the end, because kings are made of the part of boyhood that refuses to sit down when the last horn blows. Eddard was with him, because someone had to be. He saw the last gate open, and the brief wildness in Balon Greyjoy's eyes, when a man who called himself king must stand before a man who had made himself one by practice. He saw Theon, a boy with a face too handsome to last, naive and sharp both, held by men at arms who had learned by the day's end to be gentle, even with their enemies when the enemy was a child. Eddard thought of Jon and Robb and felt alive with gratitude and anger in the same turn. The gods do not choose which of a man's humors to stir. They hung men who had learned their courage at oars, and whispered promises into their salt wives' ears. Some men you hang because they will not be better for any other lesson. And they took others' swords and sent them back to villages that would always smell of fish and poverty. They took Balon's son from him, because men think to teach humility with the theft of children. Eddard had no love for that business, but he took the boy into his train, because if he did not, another would, and kindness is a skill learned by putting your mouth to bitter draughts and swallowing them. Theon looked at him with a bravado Eddard recognized from his own face at 14, the night Brandon had dared him to climb the inner wall in frost. "You will come north and be a man there," Eddard told him. "Do not think of this as chains. Think of it as breath. You will learn to breathe in a new air. If you try to breathe the old down your throat, you will choke." The boy laughed as boys do when they are humiliated and try to make a sport of it. "I will learn to breathe in snow, my lord." "You will learn to breathe in a house where men hold their tongues and their drink," Eddard said. "You will learn to breathe where winter is not a story. That is better for you than the bottom of a rope." Robert grunted and wanted to mock the boy, and then did not, to Eddard's brief astonishment and longer gratitude. "Send him to the wolves," the king said, and clapped Eddard's shoulder hard enough to bruise. Let them teach him their manners. He sent a raven ahead to Winterfell to say that the Greyjoy boy would come under the roof and be made into something useful, if he could be. Lyanna wrote back one line. I will not let him teach ours to love boats. It made him laugh into the wind, and Jon, who was not yet 8, looked up at his father's bent head and laughed without asking why. Robb laughed because Jon did, and Theon laughed because he would always rather be in on a joke than outside of it, even when he did not understand. They came home to a house that had learned how to be large enough for all of it. For a girl with copper hair and a temper, she had smothered under courtesy, because she did not yet know another way to lie. For a boy with a name that fit too loosely, and a pride that fit exactly, and would have to be let out as he grew. For a mother who had kept the fire going and a sister who had taught the fire that it did not own the Hulel heart. Lyanna took Theon's measure with one glance, and then another. She set him to a stool, and put bread into his hand, and told him to eat it sitting down, because men who had been on ships too long forgot that chairs were an invention worth respecting. He scowled with relief, and ate as if the bread would make a map in him. Later, he stood under the arch in the yard, and watched Jon and Robb with an expression too complicated to be envy or pity. And Eddard stood beside him, and did not make a lesson of it, because there was no lesson that did not sound like it had been copied from a poor book. That night, after the hall had drained of laughter, and men had found their palates, and the last plate had been scraped clean by a boy with ambition enough to try to lick copper, Eddard went to the godswood alone. The snow, at the foot of the heart tree, held the indifferent glitter of early winter. He bowed his head, not because he expected answer, but because men do some motions not to be answered, but to be made ready for more questions. He said, because saying is a way to make a thought sit still. We brought home a boy who was not ours. We kept safe one who is and is not. We taught another to call me father. I am a man with too many sons and not enough knights. Now, the tree gave him nothing. The breath in his chest went in and out, and made its small music in the cold. And that was the comfort given. He took it, because men must take what is, and leave aside what they want. Jon began in those years to grow into his shadow. He learned from Rodrik that a blade is a tool, and from Lyanna that anger is one too, and from Eddard that neither should be used when a word will do. He loved the practice yard because he loved any place where rules are clear and effort is rewarded. And he loved the rookery because he loved any place where a patient man can make a bird he has not seen in a year return to his wrist for seed and familiarity. He loved his brother, which is a dangerous habit and a saving one. He had hours where he forgot himself, and hours where he remembered too fiercely. He began to look like the man he would be, and the child he had been together, which is to say, he was all contradiction and had not yet learned to hide it. Robb became the kind of boy men love to spend their time on. Open, eager, brave without cruelty, loud without malice. Catelyn watched him as women watch their sons, with pride and with dread. She taught him to sit a chair as well as a horse, to listen to a man talk himself into a corner and then throw him a rope, to taste ale and say of it something more useful than good. Lyanna took him into the yard and knocked him down and laughed, and told him to find his balance in his own bones and not in his love of any weapon. He listened to both women, which is a rare boy. Sansa grew fair and careful. Men would later mistake that for harmlessness and learn that justice can be served best by hands that do not shake and a voice that never rises. She sang and found the pitch of Winterfell stone and matched it. She learned to sew and set her stitches with an attention that would one day save more than cloth. She loved her father with a courtesy she believed a virtue, and loved her aunt with the simple, delighted love little girls give the women who make them laugh, and then let them try on the making themselves. Lyanna told her stories about maidens who went into woods and came out again with dirty hands and something to show for it. Catelyn told her stories about ladies who kept their houses standing while men played at glory. Sansa learned both by heart. Theon made friends with Robb because Robb would be friends with any boy who smiled at him. He made competition with Jon because Jon's silence made Theon's laughter feel like a victory when it drew a smile. He made trouble with Palla in the kitchens because Palla was a fool-some boy and Theon was a fool-handsome boy and Theon was a fool for not yet knowing the trouble. Eddard did not forbid that trouble. He let it play out into a marriage no one had expected, and 3 children. And Theon grew less handsome and more useful, and learned to sit a bench in Winterfell's lower hall and hear small complaints from small men without turning them into tales about himself. There are many ways to reclaim a shipwreck. Letters came and went, making of the world a place a man can pretend to know. Jon Arryn wrote of the king's temper and the queen's cool, of Stannis' stubbornness and Renly's charm, and the space between them into which rats creep and make nests. Varys sent friendly poison disguised as news, and was thanked for it politely, and never wholly believed. Petyr Baelish made of coin and gossip the same trade and paid himself from both. Doran Martell wrote once in his careful, almost painful hand, to say he would never forgive but might one day be too tired to make of his dislike a weapon. Oberyn wrote again twice, each letter a song with thorns. Arthur Dayne wrote to say a boy had been born at Starfall who was named Edric, and would have a laugh like a river over flat stones if the gods were kind. Ashara Dayne sent a stitchwork, blue flowers on bare linen, and Lyanna hung it in the solar and did not apologize for the knowledge that it made men tell stories. Years went on as years do. The castle learned a new quiet. Messengers learned to come to the kitchen door if they wished Lyanna's temper to be good. The smith learned to set aside a scrap of the best each week for a boy called John, because the boy watched the working of the iron like a man watches the flight of a hawk, and would not be turned away. Robb learned to carry a younger brother who came between him and John, and demanded the world like a lord, and another who came after, and made a habit of falling from heights with peculiar joy. Sansa learned to hold a baby and to sing when he fussed. The world beyond the walls learned to find its politics again, and to pretend it had been born to them. Once, at the end of a summer where the wheat had goldened as if the sun loved only the north, Robert came north again without warning. He rode smaller this time, as if the chair had taught him humility, and laughed less, as if laughter had learned to cost him something. He embraced Eddard and swung Robb once more and then groaned, as if his back had been sold to old age at a discount. He held Jon's shoulders in his 2 hands, and looked into the boy's face, and did not flinch, and did not embrace him either. He kissed Lyanna's cheek like a brother, and suffered her to walk with him along the wall, where wind worried at his beard. They spoke for a long time and no man heard what was said, and that was as it should be. When he left, he drank only once, and not to excess, and Jon Arryn had the look of a man who has been permitted to sleep an extra hour. The queen did not come. She sent a polite, cold letter, and Catelyn answered it with one that could have been laid upon a fever, and cooled it. In the godswood that night, Eddard touched the bark and said, with a tired man's humor, "It is a poor tale that ends with nothing burnt." The tree did not answer. The raven on the branch above said, "Snow," and Eddard did not argue. If there was a shadow upon them then, it lay far off, and did not yet claim the shape of a man. The wall had begun to speak in the voices of men who had made poor choices and worse. The South had begun to operate with all of the grace and none of the charity of a market where silk is sold to fools. But Winterfell held. Boys laughed in the yard. Wolves sang at night, and were answered by men who thought themselves brave for listening. Lyanna rode in the morning with frost making lace at the corners of her jaw. Catelyn's hands were chapped and clean. Eddard counted barrels and berths, and the kind of peace that must be counted in breaths. One morning as the first true cold came in with a prideful step, Lyanna stood with Jon at the edge of the godswood pond and watched ice find itself in a skin from bank to bank. Jon put a boot out and tested it, and pulled back quick as a trout at a heron's shadow. Lyanna put a hand on his shoulder, and felt under her palm the shape of bone that was too much Rhaegar, and too much Stark and too much boy to be anything but wholly her son. "Promise me," she said lightly, as if humor could be a veil that kept the old request from scaring them. "You will not go on to ice you have not seen hold another." He smiled up, quick and shy all at once, and nodded. "I promise." She ruffled his hair. "Good. Break that one, and I will put you to bed for a sennight with Luwin's worst draught to keep you company." She watched the ice take the place where his reflection had been, and thought, with a sharpness that made her eyes sting, of a tower and a sword and a name. She did not say it. Some truths are held in the hand like a hot coal. passed from one to the other in the dark. Eddard saw them there from the bridge, and paused, and let the cold make from his breath a working of smoke. He felt for a moment all of it at once, the tower and the truce and the child, and the king and the winter, and the dragon no man spoke of. And he said to the wind, which pretends not to hear, but always does, "All right, I will not make a verse of it. I will make a house." Nendero. Winter fell properly 2 weeks later, and the keep took it in with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman turning out a work he has made many times and still takes pride in. Wood was brought in and stacked where it would not fall. Salted meat was set in the place between too warm and too cold. The old women found their stools, and the young men found their duties. John and Rob skittered on the practice pond under Roderick's gruff eye, and discovered that falling is only painful the first 6 times. Sansa sat by the fire and stitched blue petals into a sprig that would have made old Nan cluck if she had been the sort to scold a girl for liking her aunt too well. One night, long after men with more ale than wisdom had finished trying to name the half-remembered places of their childhoods, a raven came with a ribbon the color of a bruise. John Aaron's hand again, the script steady, the words like stones laid one by one to make a footing for men to cross a hard stream. The king was ill. Not sick in his bed with a fever men could feed and pray down, but ill in the slow, corrosive way kings in comfortable chairs get, with too much meat and too much wine, and too many men willing to taste for poison and call it love. The realm held but had begun to move in small, sly ways that make a man check his purse after a handshake. Eddard took the letter to the godswood out of habit, and then carried it to Lyanna, because some habits must be improved upon to be useful. She read and looked at him with a weariness that was not merely the day. "He will call you," she said. "When he does, I will go," Eddard answered. She nodded. "And we will keep the house," she said. "We will put bread on the tables and stories in the mouths of the children, and we will watch the ice with proper caution." She looked toward the heart tree and then away. "We will teach the boy to be a man without turning him into a story." Eddard smiled. "Faint as torchlight. That is all I ever wanted." "Liar," she said, affectionate. "You wanted to grow up to be father." He looked at her, and then at the yard where the prints of boys' feet made a pattern that would be gone by morning. "No," he said. "I wanted to grow up to be the man who could keep father's house when men with swords came and asked for a song." Lyanna laughed softly. "You do not sing," she said. "You hum badly." "Then I will hum," he said. And the old gods, if they listened, were not offended. Snow shook down against the shutters, and the boys in the beds made small, important noises, and the ravens dreamt on their perches of fields full of corn, and men who never learned to shut the shutters tight. Beyond the walls, the wild made its bargains with the dark. Within them, the house kept its. The years to come would ask much. For that moment, the only oaths required were these: to keep the fires banked, to put a hand on a child's hair in passing, to count the barrels again in the morning, and be honest if you had miscounted, to go to the tree and lay your breath where the old breaths lay, and not ask to be told you were right. And if, sometimes in the middle hour, Eddard Stark woke and looked at the dark and saw the hard line of a pale sword in a desert he had left far behind, and if he heard in that moment a woman's voice say, "Promise me," and a child's breath answer, he did not call for a maester. He sat up, he put his feet to the floor, he went to the window, he put his hand out into the cold, and he let the wind remind him that truce too is a kind of vow you keep each day fresh or it goes stale. He stood there until his breath came even, and went back to his bed and lay beside his wife, who did not pretend to be asleep when he was not. He took her hand. She took his. The night made room. The house held. The story did not end.